There's a version of Finn the human standing in the snow, staring at a crown made of ice and ancient magic. His mechanical arm trembles. Behind him, his wife and children huddle together, watching. The crown whispers promises of power, of protection, of the ability to save everyone he loves. And Finn knows, somewhere deep in his hero's heart, that if he puts it on, he'll lose himself completely. But the mutants are coming. The world is dying. His family needs him to be strong. So he reaches down, fingers brushing the frozen metal, and makes the choice that will doom everything. This isn't the Finn you know. This is Farmworld Finn. And his story begins with someone else's wish gone catastrophically wrong. In this video, we're going to explore Farmworld, the darkest what-if scenario in Adventure Time, where one wish rewrote reality and turned hope into horror, where the hero never went on adventures, and where the best friend became the ultimate evil. So get cozy, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's dive into the timeline where everything went wrong. Because sometimes saving the world means destroying it first. Let's rewind to where this nightmare begins. The Lich, primordial embodiment of death and extinction, stands before Prismo the Wishmaster in his cosmic time room. The Lich has just done the impossible, killed Prismo's boss, stolen the Enchiridion, and opened a portal to the centre of the multiverse itself. And now, standing before a being who can grant any wish imaginable, the Lich makes his move. I wish the bomb never went off. 5 words. That's all it takes to rewrite reality. Now, you might be thinking, wait, isn't that actually a good wish? The mushroom bomb, the catalyst for Adventure Time's entire post-apocalyptic setting, the weapon that ended human civilization and created the land of Oo as we know it, never detonates? Shouldn't that mean more humans survive, less mutation, less chaos? Shouldn't that create a better world? And that's the trap. That's the beautiful, terrible irony of Farmworld, because the Lich doesn't do anything for purely altruistic reasons. The Lich understands something fundamental about causality that most beings don't. Sometimes preventing one disaster just sets up something worse. Prismo grants the wish. Reality shivers, fractures, and reconstructs itself. A new timeline blooms into existence, branching off from the main continuity like a twisted tree growing in the wrong direction. And in this timeline, on that fateful day centuries ago when the bomb should have detonated, it simply doesn't. The payload remains inert. The mushroom cloud never forms. Humanity doesn't get instantly vaporized in nuclear fire. But here's where it gets complicated, because Prismo's magic operates on very specific rules. See, Prismo doesn't just snap his fingers and remake reality arbitrarily. He's bound by cosmic law, by the mathematical precision of wish logic. When the Lich says, "I wish the bomb never went off," Prismo interprets that literally. The bomb didn't detonate at that moment in history, but the bomb still exists. The mutagen is still inside it. All the political tensions that led to the Mushroom War still happened. The crown of the Ice King still corrupted Simon Petrikov. The cosmic entities, the magic, the monsters, they're all still out there. Prismo just hit pause on the apocalypse. He didn't cancel it. Think about it like this. Imagine you're in a car speeding toward a cliff, and someone grants your wish to never drive off that cliff at this exact moment. Great, right? Except the car is still speeding, the cliff is still there, and now nobody's hitting the brakes because everyone thinks the danger is over. That's Farmworld. A world living on borrowed time, convinced it dodged extinction, not realizing it just traded instant annihilation for slow, agonizing decay. The timeline splits, and in this new branch of reality, humanity limps forward. Without the instant apocalypse of nuclear fire, some semblance of civilization persists. But it's not thriving, it's barely surviving. Because all the problems that caused the Mushroom War in the first place, all that violence and desperation and societal collapse, they don't just disappear. They fester. The world descends into a different kind of apocalypse, slower and colder, until we arrive at the Farmworld we see in the show, a frozen wasteland populated by desperate humans, mutant creatures, and the ever-present threat of raiders and chaos. And the bomb? The bomb is still out there, buried somewhere in the ice, waiting like a terrible gift nobody wanted. This is where Farmworld gets philosophically fascinating, because Adventure Time is essentially asking, What if preventing the apocalypse isn't actually the solution? What if some disasters are so deeply rooted in systemic problems that stopping them only delays the inevitable? It's like treating the symptom but ignoring the disease. The Mushroom War happened because of humanity's flaws, its violence, its inability to live in harmony. Stopping the bomb doesn't fix humanity. It just gives humanity more time to destroy itself in other ways. The butterfly effect principle is in full display here. One change, one wish, and suddenly the entire structure of reality shifts. Finn isn't raised by Jake's parents. The Candy Kingdom never forms. Princess Bubblegum doesn't exist. Marceline's history changes. The Ice King is still out there somewhere, but his story has diverged. Every character's fate gets rewritten because the fundamental event that shaped the land of Oo never occurred the way it was supposed to. And here's where it gets even darker. The Lich knows all this. The Lich, being a cosmic entity tied to extinction itself, understands that preventing the bomb doesn't save humanity. It just creates conditions for a different kind of ending, one where the Lich can still operate, still spread death and corruption. In the main timeline, the Lich was trapped for centuries after the Mushroom War, sealed away by the aftermath of that nuclear devastation. But in Farmworld, the Lich has more freedom to operate in different ways. The Wish creates a timeline where the hero is just a farmer, where magic is rarer and more dangerous, where humanity huddles in the dark waiting for the end that never quite comes but never goes away either. It's a timeline built on false hope and delayed consequences. It's a timeline where every day feels like survival, but there's no grand adventure to make the suffering meaningful. This is the genius of Farmworld as a narrative device. Adventure Time takes the classic alternate reality trope and uses it to explore something genuinely unsettling. What if the apocalypse we got was actually the better option? What if the colourful, magical, bizarre land of Oo, born from nuclear fire and mutation, is preferable to a world that avoided immediate destruction but lost its spark, its magic, its possibility? Because Farmworld isn't just dark, it's empty. It's a world where wonder died not in an explosion but in a slow freeze, where heroes never rise because there's no mythology to support them, where a boy named Finn grows up just trying to feed his family, instead of fighting the Ice King and saving princesses and discovering who he is. The emotional weight of Farmworld hits differently when you realise what it represents. It's a world where nothing special ever happens because the catalyst for something special never occurred. It's the timeline where Finn is nobody, Jake doesn't exist as we know him, and the closest thing to adventure is fighting off mutants for scraps of food. It's a world that survived but forgot how to live, and the crown, that cursed artifact sitting in the snow, becomes the centre of Farmworld's tragedy. Because in the main timeline, the crown's corruption is balanced by the love and friendship around Finn. The Ice King is a nuisance, yes, but he's also part of the ecosystem of Oo, part of the weird family that makes up that world. In Farmworld, the crown is just pure danger, pure temptation, pure corruption with nothing to balance it out. When Farmworld Finn finds it, there's no Jake to talk him out of it, no Princess Bubblegum to provide an alternative solution, no community of magical friends to share the burden. It's just Finn, his family, and an impossible choice. Prismo's wish magic reveals something uncomfortable about reality. You can't just change one thing and expect everything else to work out fine. Reality is a web of interconnected events, and pulling one thread unravels others in unpredictable ways. The Lich understood this. He made a wish that sounds heroic on the surface, preventing the bomb from going off, but the underlying intention was to create chaos in a different form. To show that existence itself tends toward entropy, that destruction finds a way no matter how you try to prevent it. It's cosmic horror dressed up in Adventure Time's surreal aesthetic. It's the idea that some timelines are just doomed from the start, that the universe has multiple paths but some of those paths lead nowhere good, and that wishes granted without understanding their full implications can create nightmares. The setup of Farmworld also introduces a question that haunts the rest of the arc. If changing the past creates something worse, does that mean the present, however flawed, is worth preserving? Is the land of Oo, with all its danger and weirdness and apocalyptic history, actually the best possible timeline? Or is that just the bias of existing within it? These are the questions Adventure Time wants us to sit with. Not comfortable questions, Not questions with easy answers, just the slow, creeping realization that maybe the multiverse is more complicated than we want it to be, that maybe happy endings in one timeline require tragedies in another, and that maybe, just maybe, the wish that saves everyone is also the wish that dooms them. Farmworld exists as a mirror, showing us what Adventure Time could have been if the fundamental transformative event never happened. And it's bleak. It's a reminder that transformation, even painful transformation, is sometimes necessary for growth. That the apocalypse that created horrible as it was, also created the possibility for something new, something magical, something worth fighting for. Without that transformative fire, you get Farmworld, stagnant, cold, waiting to die. And standing in the snow, staring at the crown, Farmworld Finn is about to make a choice that proves the Lich right. Because when you strip away adventure, strip away magic, strip away the community and mythology that makes a hero, what you're left with is just a desperate person making a desperate choice. And desperation doesn't create heroes, it creates monsters. The Lich's wish didn't destroy the world. It created a world that destroys itself slowly, day by day, choice by choice, until there's nothing left but ice, and regret, and the haunting question of what could have been. So when Finn reaches for that crown, he's not just reaching for power. He's reaching for the only option left in a world that gave up on possibilities. He's reaching for the thing that will damn him, because damnation looks like salvation when you're standing in the frozen wasteland of a reality that was supposed to be saved. Isn't that the real horror of Farmworld? Not that the bomb exists, not that monsters roam the wasteland, but that hope itself became the cruelest trap of all. Picture this, a world painted in shades of grey and frozen blue, where the sky hangs heavy with clouds that never quite break, where ruins of the old world jut from the earth like broken teeth, and where every horizon promises nothing but more emptiness. This is Farmworld, and it looks nothing like the land of Ooh. Where Ooh is vibrant and alive, bursting with colour and possibility, Farmworld is muted and dying. Where Ooh has candy kingdoms and fire kingdoms and cloud kingdoms, Farmworld has settlements. Small clusters of humans huddled together against the cold, against the mutants, against the slow inevitability of extinction. The landscape itself feels like it's given up, like the earth decided to stop trying and just let winter claim everything. The most striking thing about Farmworld when you first see it is the absence. No candy kingdom rising in pink spires against a blue sky. No tree fort where Finn and Jake live their adventures. No ice kingdom with its ridiculous architectural choices and penguin minions. Instead, you get farmland that barely produces, and forests that look skeletal even when they have leaves, and mountains that loom in the distance like sleeping giants waiting to wake up and finish what the war started. The world is cold. Not just temperature cold, though it's definitely that, but cold in the way a place feels when hope has mostly drained out of it. The show's art style, normally so bouncy and whimsical, takes on this washed-out quality in Farmworld. Colours are desaturated, shadows are longer, even the character designs feel heavier, more grounded, less cartoonish. It's like someone took the brightness slider in Adventure Time and just cranked it way down, leaving you with a world that exists in perpetual overcast. But let's get specific about what this wasteland actually looks like, because the details matter. The show gives us glimpses of Farmworld's geography, and each glimpse tells a story about what happened here. First, there are the ruins. Scattered across the landscape, you'll find the skeletal remains of pre-war civilization. Buildings that are half collapsed, their structures exposed to the elements, their windows long since shattered. Roads that go nowhere, cracked and broken, reclaimed by whatever tough vegetation manages to survive in this climate. Vehicles rusted beyond recognition, their purposes forgotten. These ruins aren't like the quirky wreckage you find in Ooh, where ancient technology gets repurposed for candy science experiments or magical shenanigans. These ruins are just dead. They're monuments to a civilization that destroyed itself through slower means than nuclear fire, but destroyed itself all the same. The ruins tell us something important. The Mushroom War still happened in Farmworld, just differently. The social collapse, the violence, the breakdown of systems that keep civilization functioning, all of that occurred. The bomb not going off didn't prevent the wars that led up to it. So you've got this landscape littered with evidence of humanity's failure, but without the magical mutation that transformed the main timeline's wreckage into something new and strange. It's just wreckage. Permanent, inert wreckage serving as tombstones for a world that died slowly instead of quickly. Moving through Farmworld, you'd encounter different zones, each with its own particular flavour of desolation. Near what passes for civilization, the farmland itself is harsh and unforgiving. The soil is poor. The growing season is short. Everything about agriculture here is a struggle against entropy. You can see it in how Finn's farm looks. Functional but barely. Productive but only through constant effort. The kind of place where every harvest feels like a minor miracle, and every winter feels like it might be the last one you survive. Venture further from the settlements, and you hit the mutant zones. These are areas where the pre-war chemical and biological weapons left their mark. Even without the mushroom bomb's instant transformation, humanity still had plenty of other ways to poison the earth. Mutagenic runoff, experimental warfare agents, industrial contamination that never got cleaned up because society collapsed before anyone could deal with it. These zones are where the mutants breed and hunt. The mutants in Farmworld are different from Ooze magical creatures. They're not cute or friendly or running their own kingdoms. They're just dangerous. Twisted versions of what animals used to be, driven by hunger and aggression, lacking the spark of personality that makes even the monsters in You feel like characters. These mutants are obstacles, threats, reminders that the world itself has turned hostile to human life. They roam in packs, they raid settlements, and they represent the constant low-level terror of living in Farmworld. The knowledge that danger is always just beyond the perimeter, waiting for you to drop your guard. Then there are the mountains. In the distance, always visible, you've got this range of peaks that dominate the horizon. Somewhere up there, buried in ice and snow, is the crown. The Ice Kingdom exists in Farmworld, but it's not a kingdom at all. It's just a frozen waste at altitude, uninhabitable and avoided. The mountains serve as a visual anchor, a reminder of the power that waits in the cold places, but also as a kind of mythological space. In a world without much magic, the mountains become the place where magic still sleeps, dangerous and tempting. The visual design of these mountains is particularly effective. They're rendered with these sharp, angular lines, very different from the soft, rounded aesthetic of most Adventure Time landscapes. They look hostile, inhospitable, like the earth itself pushed up barriers to keep people away from something they shouldn't touch. And the ice on those peaks never melts, even in whatever passes for summer in Farmworld. It's permanent winter up there, the crown's influence radiating outward, making the high places uninhabitable. What's fascinating is how the show uses Farmworld's landscape to create this sense of scale. Ooh often feels kind of compact, like you can walk from the Candy Kingdom to the Ice Kingdom in an afternoon. Farmworld feels vast, empty. Distances matter here in a way they don't in the magical land. When characters travel in Farmworld, you feel the time passing, the danger of exposure, the logistics of survival. It's the difference between a fantasy map and a real geography, where, over there, isn't just a quick scene transition away but actually requires planning and risk. The human settlements that do exist are small and fortified. We see Finn's farm and get glimpses of what looks like a nearby town or trading post. These places are built for defence, not beauty. Walls made of salvaged materials, guard posts, a constant state of low-level alert. The architecture is purely functional. Keep the weather out, keep the mutants out, make sure you can defend against raiders. There's no artistry here, no expression of culture or identity, just survival engineering. Compare this to Ooh, where every kingdom is a wild expression of its ruler's personality and the nature of its inhabitants. The Candy Kingdom is sweet and scientific and somewhat authoritarian, reflecting Princess Bubblegum. The Fire Kingdom is chaotic and passionate. The lumpy space is ridiculous and dramatic. Each location in Ooh has character, has story baked into its design. Farmworld settlements have one story. We're still here, barely, and we're fighting to stay that way. The absence of kingdoms is actually the most telling detail about Farmworld's geography. Without the mushroom bomb's transformative mutation, without the magical weirdness that arose from nuclear fire, you don't get the conditions for kingdoms to form. You don't get elementals and wizards and candy people and fire people. You just get humans struggling. And humans, when they're struggling for survival, don't build kingdoms, they build fences. There's also this interesting visual motif throughout Farmworld. Everything is lower to the ground. In Ooh, structures reach upward, trees are tall, buildings have height. There's this vertical energy to the landscape. Farmworld is horizontal, sprawling, pressed down by the weight of survival. It's like the world itself is crouching, trying to present a smaller target to whatever might be hunting it. The weather in Farmworld is worth noting too. It's consistently overcast, cold, with this wind that seems to blow constantly. Not the magical weather of Ooh, where Ice King can make it snow or Flame Princess can raise the temperature. This is just regular, grinding, unpleasant weather that makes life harder. The kind of weather that wears you down over time, that makes everything from farming to travelling more difficult, that serves as yet another pressure on a population already stretched thin. When the show wants to establish Farmworld's atmosphere, it often uses these wide shots where you can see the scale of the emptiness. A small farmhouse against a huge grey sky. A lone figure walking across frozen ground with nothing but wasteland in every direction. The visual language says, you are small, the world is indifferent, and there is no magic coming to save you. It's the opposite of Ooh's visual language, which says, anything can happen, magic's around every corner, and even the scary stuff is kind of fun. But here's where Farmworld gets weirdly compelling. Even in all this bleakness, Adventure Time's art style can't help but make things slightly surreal. The mutants, while dangerous, still have that slightly cartoony quality. The ruins have these interesting shapes. Even the colour palette, muted as it is, has this artistic coherence to it. It's like the show is saying, yes, this is a Nightmare timeline, but it's still our Nightmare timeline, still filtered through Adventure Time's particular aesthetic lens. There's beauty in the desolation, if you're twisted enough to appreciate it. The way ice forms on abandoned structures, the stark contrast of dark ruins against white snow, the silhouettes of the mountains at distance. Farmworld is ugly and harsh, but it's also composed like a painting of decay, each frame carefully constructed to show you the specific flavour of this apocalypse. And maybe that's the point. Maybe Farmworld works as horror precisely because we can see what it could have been. The landscape has potential. You can imagine, if things were different, if the bomb had gone off and created Ooh instead, how these same geographical features might have become something magical. That mountain range could have been the Ice Kingdom with all its weird charm. Those forests could have been home to candy citizens or weird wizards. The ruins could have been rebuilt into something whimsical. But they weren't. They're just ruins in a frozen wasteland, home to desperate humans and hungry mutants, under a sky that never really brightens. The environmental storytelling in Farmworld is particularly effective because it shows us what Adventure Time's world looks like without hope. Not without people, not without survival, but without that essential spark that makes struggle feel worthwhile. Ooh is weird and dangerous, but it's also full of possibility, of magic, of the sense that today might be the day something amazing happens. Farmworld is also dangerous, but there's no sense of possibility. Just the grinding certainty that tomorrow will be like today. Cold, hard, and requiring all your energy just to make it through. Walking through Farmworld would feel like walking through a museum of human failure. Every broken building, every mutant, every struggling farm serves as evidence that the species tried and mostly failed. The geography doesn't inspire adventure, it inspires caution, wariness, the constant calculation of risk versus reward. Should you venture into those ruins to scavenge supplies, knowing mutants might be nesting there? Should you try to plant crops in that field, knowing the soil is poor and raiders might destroy your harvest? Every decision is weighted by survival logic, not heroic impulse. And there's no magic to bail you out. In Ooh, if things go wrong, there's always the possibility that some weird wizard or magical artifact or dimensional portal might offer an escape or solution. In Farmworld, if things go wrong, you just die. The world is governed by physics and scarcity and violence, not by the whimsical logic of fantasy. This makes the landscape feel more oppressive because it follows rules, predictable and harsh rules that don't care about narrative drama or heroic moments. The show uses sound design too to reinforce Farmworld's atmosphere, where Ooh is full of musical sounds, playful noises, the bizarre audio that accompanies magic. Farmworld is mostly wind and silence. The absence of sound becomes its own kind of statement. This is a world where the music has stopped, where the playful randomness of reality has been replaced by empty wind howling across empty spaces. If you were a citizen of Farmworld, your mental map would be completely different from a citizen of Ooh. You'd think in terms of safe zones and dangerous zones, resources and threats. You wouldn't name places after their magical properties or silly rulers. You'd name them after practical considerations. The dead forest where mutants nest, the ruins with the best salvage, the mountain where nobody goes. Geography as pure utility, stripped of wonder. Yet somehow, in the middle of all this bleakness, there are still humans trying. Finn's farm exists. People are having children. They're planting crops. They're maintaining some semblance of civilization. And that's its own kind of stubborn beauty, isn't it? Not the explosive, colourful beauty of Ooh, but the quiet, determined beauty of species refusing to quit, even when everything says they should. The landscape of Farmworld is a character in itself, shaping the people who live within it, limiting their possibilities, defining their choices. It's a world that says no to adventure, no to magic, no to transformation, but can't quite say no to survival. And in that tension between the world's hostility and humanity's stubborn persistence, you find the essence of what makes Farmworld compelling. Because in the end, Farmworld's frozen wasteland is what happens when you prevent the apocalypse but don't prevent the problems that caused it. You get a world that survived but didn't heal, that continues but doesn't grow, that exists in a state of perpetual decline without the dramatic reset that might have led to something new. The geography itself is trauma, frozen in place, unable to move forward or back, and somewhere in those distant mountains, buried in ice, a crown waits to make everything worse. Because apparently, even in a world without magic, corruption finds a way to grow. His name is Finn. He's human. He has a wife named Rosalind and 2 kids named Jay and Bonnie, and a mechanical arm that clicks when he bends it at certain angles. He wakes up before dawn most mornings, checks the perimeter for mutant tracks, feeds the chickens that somehow still lay eggs in this frozen hellscape, and tries to coax vegetables from soil that seems to actively resist growing anything. He's 37 years old, which makes him ancient by Farmworld standards, and every single day is about the same thing, keeping his family alive for one more rotation of this cold, indifferent planet. This is Finn the human, but he's not the Finn you know. There's no Jake making pancakes and cracking jokes, no Princess Bubblegum sending him on quests. No Ice King to fight, no Enchiridion to find, no destiny calling him toward greatness. This Finn's greatest adventure is figuring out how to fix the irrigation system before the growing season ends. His sword isn't magical, his hat isn't iconic, his life isn't a story worth telling, which is precisely what makes his story so devastating. Let's start with the mechanical arm, because it tells you everything you need to know about the difference between timelines. Main timeline. Finn loses his arm multiple times throughout the series. Each time it's this huge narrative moment. The grass sword, the tree growing from his stump, the robot arm he gets later. Each transformation of his arm represents growth, change, magical intervention, destiny reshaping his physical form to match his heroic journey. The arm becomes a symbol of Finn's evolution, his willingness to sacrifice, his connection to forces larger than himself. Farmworld Finn's mechanical arm is just a prosthetic. It's metal and gears and leather straps. It probably came from some salvage yard or was cobbled together by whoever passes for an engineer in the settlements. It works well enough for farm labour, for holding tools, for hugging his kids carefully so the hard edges don't poke them. But it's not magic. It doesn't transform. It doesn't symbolise anything except the harsh reality that in Farmworld, if you lose a limb, you either adapt with mundane technology or you die. We never get the full story of how he lost the arm, which is itself telling. In the main timeline, Finn's arm loss is always a major plot point, a moment of drama and consequence. In Farmworld, it probably happened during some mundane struggle for survival. Maybe fighting mutants. Maybe an accident during salvage work. Maybe just bad luck in a world where medical care is scarce, and injuries that would be inconvenient in Ooh are potentially fatal in Farmworld. The show doesn't bother explaining because in Farmworld, losing an arm isn't special. It's just another price you pay for existing. But look at Finn's face when he adjusts that arm, when he works the joints to make sure they're still functioning. There's no resentment there, no anger at the universe for taking his limb, just practical assessment, the same way he'd check a fence post or inspect a tool. This Finn has learned to accept loss without drama, because drama is a luxury he can't afford. You lose an arm, you get a mechanical replacement, you keep working. That's survival. That's all there is. Now let's talk about Rosalinin, because she's the centre of Farmworld Finn's entire world. She's his wife, his partner, the mother of his children, and the reason he gets up every morning to face the grinding monotony of survival. We don't get a lot of detail about how they met, how they fell in love, what their early days together were like, but you can see in how they interact that there's genuine affection here, genuine partnership. This isn't a marriage of convenience in a harsh world, though it certainly helps to have two people sharing the burden. This is love, are real and unglamorous, and expressed through small acts of care rather than grand gestures. Watch how Finn looks at Rosalinin when she's talking. There's a tension there, presence. He's not a hero thinking about his next adventure. He's a husband listening to his wife. When she's worried about the children, he shares that worry. When she's tired, he takes on extra work. When she smiles at something one of the kids does, he smiles too. It's intimate in a way main timeline Finn's relationships never quite achieve, because main timeline Finn is always caught between his feelings and his heroic duties. Farmworld Finn has no such conflict. His duty is right here, in this house, with these people. Everything else is secondary. Rosalinin herself is practical and strong, the kind of person who has to be to survive in this world. She's not a princess waiting to be rescued. She's a farmer's wife who probably works just as hard as Finn does, who makes the food stretch, who teaches the children what they need to know to survive. There's no romance of hardship here, no glorification of struggle. Just two people who found each other in a terrible world and decided to build something together despite everything. Then there are the kids, Jay and Bonnie. Their names are simple, ordinary, lacking the whimsical quality of names in ooh. Jay is the older one, maybe 10 or 11, already learning to help with the farm work, already being shaped by the harsh realities of Farmworld. Bonnie is younger, still has some of that childhood innocence that hasn't been completely worn away by the environment. Watching Finn with his children is watching a man who would do absolutely anything to protect them, who structures his entire existence around keeping them safe, fed, warm. And here's where the tragedy starts to crystallize. Because Finn is a good father, he's patient with the kids when they make mistakes. He teaches them what they need to know. He plays with them when there's time, which isn't often. He tells them stories, probably edited versions of legends from before the world went wrong, trying to give them some sense that life can be more than just survival. He's doing everything right by the standards of Farmworld parenting. But main timeline, Finn would have been an incredible father too, and he'd have been able to give his kids something Farmworld Finn can't, a world worth inheriting. In Ooh, Finn's children would grow up in the Candy Kingdom, or the Tree Fort, or wherever he settled. They'd have Princess Bubblegum's science, Marceline's music, Jake's wisdom, a whole community of weird magical beings teaching them that the universe is strange and wonderful and full of possibility. They'd grow up knowing their dad was a hero who saved the world multiple times, who punched the Lich in the face, who never stopped fighting for what was right. Jay and Bonnie are growing up learning how to identify mutant tracks, and which ruins are too dangerous to salvage from. That's the inheritance Farmworld Finn can give them. Practical survival skills for a world that doesn't want them to survive. Let's dig into Finn's daily routine, because it reveals character through accumulation. He wakes up early before the family and does a perimeter check. This is automatic for him, muscle memory. He's looking for signs of mutants, signs of raiders, anything that might threaten his home. Then he tends to the animals, does whatever farm work needs doing, fixes things that break, and they're always breaking because nothing in Farmworld is built to last. Everything is salvaged, repurposed, held together by sheer stubbornness. Meals are simple. Whatever they've grown or traded for, there's no cake that tastes like rainbows, no everything burrito, none of the magical food abundance of ooh, just potatoes and tough bread and occasionally meat if they're lucky. The family eats together when possible, which is Rosalinen's rule, and Finn enforces it because family meals are one of the few touches of normalcy they can maintain. During these meals, they talk about practical things, the farm, the weather, what needs doing tomorrow. Sometimes the kids ask questions about the old world, about what things were like before, and Finn answers as best he can, though his knowledge is probably spotty. At night, after the kids are asleep, Finn and Rosalind sit together for a little while, too tired to do much but exist in each other's presence. Sometimes they talk about concerns, the harvest, the possibility of raiders, whether they should risk trading at the settlement. Sometimes they don't talk at all, just sit there, two people too exhausted by survival to do anything but rest before doing it all again tomorrow. This is heroism stripped down to its bones. No swords, no quests, no glory. Just the determination to keep going, to keep protecting, to refuse to give up even when giving up would be easier. And here's the thing, it takes incredible strength to live like this. Farmworld Finn has the same core character as main timeline Finn, that same stubborn refusal to quit, that same protective instinct, that same fundamental goodness. But all that energy, all that heroic potential is directed entirely at survival. Imagine having the spirit of a hero but living in a world that has no space for heroes. That's Farmworld Finn's existence. He has all this capacity for greatness, for adventure, for changing the world, and absolutely zero opportunity to express it. So instead he farms, he fixes fences, he teaches his son how to set snares for small game. He holds his daughter when she has nightmares about mutants. This is what heroism looks like when there's no narrative structure to support it. No grand evil to fight, no princess to save. Just day after day of small acts of protection and care that nobody will ever write songs about. The relationship between Farmworld Finn and main timeline. Finn's life without Jake deserves special attention. Jake in the main timeline is Finn's brother, best friend, conscience, comedic foil, and emotional anchor. So much of who Finn becomes is shaped by Jake's presence. Jake teaches Finn about nuance, about when not to fight, about enjoying life's simple pleasures. Jake grounds Finn when he gets too intense. Jake makes Finn laugh when things are dark. The absence of this relationship in Farmworld can't be overstated. Farmworld Finn never had that magical dog brother to raise him, to adventure with him, to shape his moral development through 1,000 small moments of friendship. He was raised differently, by humans probably, in circumstances we can only imagine. Maybe his parents died young and he had to grow up fast. Maybe he was orphaned in one of the conflicts that plagued Farmworld and learned to survive alone. Whatever his origin, he didn't have Jake, and that absence hollowed out something essential in his development. Main timeline, Finn is optimistic, energetic, sometimes reckless, because he knows Jake has his back. He's willing to take risks because he's not alone. Farmworld Finn is cautious, measured, conservative in his choices because he has no magical backup. He's learned that risks usually have bad outcomes. That optimism is dangerous, that the universe doesn't care about heroes. This is what Finn looks like without Jake's influence, and it's sobering. The heroic spirit is still there, but it's been beaten down, shaped by harsh reality, into something more defensive, more protective, more focused on not losing what little he has rather than trying to gain anything new. There's also something profound about Farmworld Finn's relationship to his own ordinariness. He's not trying to be special. He's not chafing against the limitations of his life. He seems to have accepted that this is what existence is. Hard work, constant vigilance, small moments of connection with the people you love. There's no sense that he's aware of what he could have been. No cosmic angst about roads not taken. He simply is what his world made him. But you have to wonder, does some part of him sense the missing pieces? Does he ever lie awake at night and feel like there should be more, like he was meant for something beyond this endless cycle of survival? Does he look at his kids and feel a crushing weight of all the things he can't give them, can't teach them? He can't show them because his world is too small and too hostile? The show doesn't answer these questions, which makes them more haunting. We're left to imagine the quiet desperation of a hero's soul trapped in circumstances that will never call on his heroism. The mechanical arm becomes a metaphor for Farmworld Finn's entire existence when you think about it. It works, it gets the job done, but it's not the real thing. It's a replacement for something that should be there but isn't, cobbled together from spare parts, functional but never quite right. Farmworld Finn is like that arm. He's doing everything a person should do, living a life, taking care of people, surviving. But he's a replacement for what he could have been, what he was meant to be in a different timeline, assembled from the spare parts of potential that this world allows him. And the worst part is, Farmworld Finn is happy, or at least as happy as anyone can be in his circumstances. He loves his wife. He loves his kids. He takes pride in his work when the harvest is good, feels satisfaction when he fixes something that was broken, sleeps the sleep of the exhausted but content. This isn't a man suffering from existential despair about his lot in life. This is a man who has found meaning in the only place it exists in Farmworld, in the people right in front of him, which makes what happens with the crown even more tragic. Because Farmworld Finn isn't some power-hungry villain waiting for an excuse to grab ultimate power. He's not weak or corrupted or secretly evil. He's just a good man pushed into an impossible situation where the only way to protect his family is to do the one thing he knows he shouldn't do. The crown doesn't corrupt a hero. It corrupts a farmer who loves his family too much to let them die. When we see Finn working, there's this quiet competence to everything he does. He knows how to read the weather, how to coax crops from poor soil, how to butcher an animal efficiently so nothing goes to waste. These are skills that took years to develop, skills that have nothing to do with fighting evil and everything to do with the practical art of not starving. In another world, with different circumstances, maybe Finn would have been a gardener in the Candy Kingdom, using these same skills to grow things instead of fight things. But Farmworld doesn't allow for peaceful vocations. Even farming is survival warfare here. The few interactions we see between Finn and his family reveal a dynamic based on quiet understanding. They don't need to talk much to communicate. Rosalind knows when Finn is worried just by how he holds his shoulders. Finn knows when the kids need reassurance versus when they need toughness. This is a family unit that's been forged by shared hardship, where everyone knows their role, where survival depends on reading each other accurately and responding appropriately. And maybe that's its own kind of adventure, in the most mundane sense. Every day is a challenge. Every season brings new problems. Every year they survive is a victory against a world that wants them dead. It's not the adventure of fighting the Lich or exploring the Nightosphere, but it's adventure nonetheless, just stripped of all glamour and romance and reduced to its essential core, overcoming obstacles to continue existing. Farmworld Finn represents something Adventure Time rarely explores: the cost of not having an adventure. He's the control group in the experiment of Finn's life. He's what happens when you take all the potential, all the heroic qualities, all the capacity for greatness, and trap it in a world that has no use for any of that. He's the answer to the question, what if Finn was just a guy? And the answer is both beautiful and heartbreaking. He'd be a good guy, a guy worth knowing, a guy doing his best in a bad situation. Just never the hero he was supposed to be. The tragedy isn't that Farmworld Finn suffers more than anyone else in his world. The tragedy is that he's exactly what his world needs him to be, which means he'll never be what he could have been. He's perfectly adapted to survive in Farmworld, which means he's perfectly limited by it. The same qualities that make him a good farmer and father are the qualities that ensure he'll never be more than a farmer and father. The caution that keeps his family alive is the caution that prevents the kind of reckless heroism main timeline Finn embodies. The focus on immediate survival that serves him well is the focus that blinds him to larger possibilities. So when that crown appears, when the desperate situation forces his hand, Farmworld Finn reaches for it not because he wants power, but because he's out of ordinary solutions. A hero would find another way. But Farmworld Finn isn't a hero. He's just a man doing what men do when they're desperate and scared and running out of options. He's making the practical choice that his survival-oriented mindset has trained him to make. And isn't that the real difference between timelines? Main timeline Finn would never put on that crown because he's been trained by adventure to believe there's always another way, always a heroic solution, always hope. Farmworld Finn puts it on because he's been trained by survival to believe that sometimes there are no good options, only less bad ones, and protecting your family means taking the least bad option, even if it damns you. The mechanical arm clicks as he reaches for the crown. A small sound. The sound of gears doing what they're supposed to do, moving how they're designed to move. The sound of something functional but not quite right. the sound of a replacement that works but will never be the real thing. In the end, Farmworld Finn is proof that heroism isn't about grand adventures and magical swords. It's about getting up every day and facing what needs to be faced, even when what needs to be faced is just another day exactly like yesterday. That takes courage too, just a different kind, quieter, less visible. The kind that doesn't get songs written about it. The kind that breaks your heart precisely because it's so ordinary, so unglamorous, so devoid of anything except stubborn, grinding, beautiful perseverance in the face of a world that offers nothing but more struggle. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just keep farming when the soil is frozen and hope is scarce, and every harvest might be your last. There's an artifact buried in the ice waiting. It has waited for centuries, patient in the way objects are patient, existing outside the concerns of flesh and time and morality. The crown is older than the Mushroom War, older than human civilization, possibly older than humanity itself. It was made by someone or something that understood magic not as whimsy, but as a fundamental force, as real and dangerous as gravity or entropy. And like all truly powerful artifacts, the crown has one purpose: to perpetuate itself, to find a wearer, to corrupt and consume until there's nothing left but ice and madness and the eternal winter of a broken mind. In the main timeline, Simon Petrikov found this crown in Scandinavia while on an archaeological expedition. He was an antiquarian, a scholar, a man who studied the past with reverence and careful documentation. He put on the crown thinking it was just an interesting historical artifact, maybe something from Norse mythology, maybe a ceremonial piece from some forgotten culture. Within moments, the crown began rewriting his mind, overwriting Simon with something else, something ancient and cold and fundamentally inhuman. That transformation took years to complete, but it was inevitable from the moment the metal touched his head. The crown doesn't grant power. The crown is power, and power demands payment, and the payment is everything you are. Here's what we know about how the crown works. It offers wishes. Not in the explicit way Prismo grants wishes, but in the implicit way all cursed objects operate. You want to be powerful. The crown makes you powerful. You want to protect someone you love? The crown gives you the magic to do that. You want to survive in a hostile world? The crown will absolutely ensure your survival. It delivers exactly what you ask for, and then it takes everything you didn't know you were bargaining away. Your memories, your personality, your humanity, your sanity. The crown is a monkey's paw that turns you into a monkey. In Farmworld, Simon Petrikov's story played out similarly, but with crucial differences. He still found the crown. He still put it on. He still went mad. But without the mushroom bomb creating the land of Oo, without the transformed landscape full of magical beings and kingdoms, Simon's transformation happened in isolation. There was no Marceline for him to protect and briefly retain his humanity for, no Betty to search for a cure, no community of magical weirdos to absorb him as just another eccentric resident. Simon became the Ice King in Farmworld the same way he did in the main timeline, but lonelier, more completely lost, with nothing to anchor even the fragments of his former self. The Farmworld Ice King probably retreated to those mountains we talked about earlier, surrounded himself with ice and snow, and either died up there or exists in some frozen semi-living state, trapped between human and elemental, consciousness scattered like snowflakes across the peaks. The crown continued its work even after its wearer was gone, radiating cold, making the mountain range uninhabitable, creating a zone of winter that never ends. The crown doesn't need a wearer to be dangerous. It just needs to exist, calling out to anyone desperate enough or foolish enough to think they can control it. And that's the fundamental lie the crown tells, that you can control it, that you're different, that you're strong enough, smart enough, desperate enough that somehow the rules won't apply to you. Every wearer of the crown has believed this. Every wearer has been wrong. The crown is patient. The crown is eternal. The crown has consumed hundreds, maybe thousands of minds over its existence, and it will consume hundreds more because the promise of power will always find someone who needs it badly enough to ignore the obvious cost. Think about what the crown represents symbolically. It's the ultimate expression of power corrupting, not gradually, not subtly, but completely and inevitably. It's the idea that some forces in the universe are simply not meant for mortals to wield, that there are prices too high to pay, but we pay them anyway because in the moment of desperation we can't see past our immediate need. The crown is every bad deal ever made, every Faustian bargain, every moment where someone says, "I'll handle the consequences later," and later never comes because there is no later, just an eternal present of being someone else, something else, nothing you ever meant to be. Adventure Time uses the crown brilliantly throughout the series as a recurring symbol of tragic inevitability. In the main timeline, we see Simon's transformation through flashbacks, through Marceline's memories, through Ice King's occasional moments of clarity, where Simon surfaces just long enough to remember what he's lost before sinking back into madness. The show treats the crown's corruption with genuine horror, never making light of what it does to people, even when Ice King himself is played for comedy. The comedy is protective colouring, a way to make the horror bearable, but the horror is always there underneath. In Farmworld, the crown sits in the snow, calling. Farmworld Finn probably knows stories about it, warnings passed down through whatever remains of human culture. Don't go to the mountains, don't touch the crown, don't think you can use it without being used. These are the stories humans tell when something is too dangerous to approach, but too powerful to destroy. The crown becomes mythological, which makes it both more frightening and more tempting. Myths are just true enough to warn you, and just vague enough that you might think you're the exception. Now let's talk about why Finn reaches for it, because this is crucial to understanding how the crown operates. Finn isn't power-hungry, he's not ambitious, he's not trying to conquer anything or prove anything, he's just trying to save his family from mutants that are closing in, from a world that's killing them slowly, from the grinding attrition of survival that he knows will eventually claim them if something doesn't change. The crown represents hope in a hopeless situation. Not real hope, but the desperate grasping kind, the kind that looks like hope but is actually just another form of surrender. Picture the scene, mutants surrounding the farm, Rosalind and the kids terrified, Finn fighting them off, but there are too many, always too many, and his mechanical arm is useful but not magical, and he's aging, slowing down, and he knows that this time or next time or the time after that, the mutants will overwhelm his defences. He's fought so hard for so long, been so careful, done everything right, and it's not enough. It's never enough. Survival isn't a victory you achieve, it's a defeat you postpone, and Finn can feel the postponement running out, so he runs, takes a journey he's probably been avoiding his whole life, and goes up into those mountains where the crown waits. The journey itself is dangerous, through territory where mutants breed and the cold is vicious. But he makes it, because Finn has always been capable, and he finds the crown right where the story said it would be, buried in ice but somehow visible, somehow calling attention to itself. Magic has a way of making itself known when it wants to be found. Finn stands there, staring at it. The crown looks innocent in a way, just metal and gems, ancient craftsmanship, beautiful if you ignore the aura of wrongness radiating from it. He knows what it does, the stories are clear. But the stories also say it grants incredible power, magic enough to freeze entire armies, to create storms, to reshape the environment itself, magic enough to protect his family, magic enough to finally stop running, stop barely surviving, and actually win. This is the moment of corruption, and it happens before he even touches the crown. The corruption is in the thought, maybe I can control it. Maybe my love for my family is strong enough to resist the curse. Maybe I'm different from everyone else who tried. The crown doesn't have to persuade him. His desperation does that work for the crown. All the crown has to do is exist, radiating possibility, offering exactly what he needs most in this moment. He reaches down. The metal is cold even through his glove. He should stop. He knows he should stop. But stopping means going back down that mountain to watch his family die slowly. And he can't do that anymore. Can't endure another night of lying awake knowing that their deaths are inevitable, and he's powerless to prevent them. So he picks up the crown, lifts it. The weight feels wrong, heavier than it should be, as if the crown carries the weight of all its previous wearers, all those consumed minds adding mass to the physical object. Finn puts the crown on his head. For a moment, nothing happens, just cold metal against his scalp. Then the invasion begins. Not gradually, but all at once, like a dam breaking. The crown's magic floods into his mind, and it's not at all what he expected. It's not power that he controls. It's power that controls him, rewriting his neural pathways, overriding his personality with something older and hungrier and fundamentally alien to human experience. The crown has its own intelligence, its own agenda, its own nature, and that nature is antithetical to warmth, to humanity, to everything Finn is. He feels his thoughts slowing down, freezing, becoming simple and cold. Complex emotions simplify into basic drives. Love for his family becomes just another thing getting buried under layers of ice. His identity, everything that makes him Finn, starts fragmenting, scattering, replaced by the crown's programming. The crown wants winter. The crown wants ice. The crown wants to spread cold until there's nothing left but frozen perfection, crystal and snow, and the absolute zero of entropy. Finn tries to resist. Of course he tries to resist. He's Finn, and Finn never gives up, but resistance is meaningless here. The crown isn't something you fight. It's something that rewrites what fighting even means. His neurons fire in new patterns, his brain chemistry changes, his very consciousness starts operating according to rules that have nothing to do with being human. The corruption is biological, neurological, spiritual, happening at every level simultaneously. His body begins to change. Frost forms on his skin, spreading from under the crown downward. His eyes shift colour, the warm human brown becoming cold blue, then white, then something beyond white. A colour that shouldn't exist. His mechanical arm freezes solid, becomes part of him in a new way, metal and ice fusing. He grows taller, broader, as the crown pumps him full of magical power that has to go somewhere, that reshapes his physical form to match his new nature. His beard grows in white and wild, his clothes transform into robes that look ancient and regal and completely inhuman. This is Ice Finn now, and Ice Finn is terrifying in ways Ice King never was, because Ice King is the result of years of slow corruption, of Simon fighting the crown every step of the way, his personality leaving fragments and quirks and comedy in the ruins of his former self. Ice Finn is instant corruption. Finn's personality consumed so quickly, there's nothing left but the crown's will operating through a body that used to be a farmer and father. Ice King is tragic. Ice Finn is horror. He stands up and power radiates from him like cold light. The entire mountain range responds to his presence. The temperature drops 20 degrees in an instant. Snow begins falling in sheets. Ice crystals form in the air itself. This isn't the playful, chaotic magic of the land of Oo. This is elemental force. The raw power of winter made manifest, and it's controlled by something wearing Finn's face but containing none of his humanity. Ice Finn speaks, and his voice is wrong. It's Finn's voice, but colder, layered with harmonics that sound like wind through icicles echoing with the crown's ancient presence. The words he says aren't farmer's words or father's words. They're proclamations about winter eternal, about freezing the world into perfect stillness, about ending the chaos of warmth and life. The crown is speaking through him, using his vocal cords, and Finn's consciousness, if it still exists anywhere, is buried so deep under ice and magic that it might as well be dead. Now imagine Ice Finn descending from the mountains. Imagine him arriving at the farm where Rosalinine and the kids wait. Do they recognise him? Is there any trace of the man they loved visible in this frozen parody of a person? Does Ice Finn even remember why he put on the crown? Or has that purpose been consumed along with everything else? The show doesn't give us this scene because it would be too dark, too final, too much even for Farmworld's bleak aesthetic. Why? But it hangs there in implication. A man tried to save his family and became the thing that would destroy them. This is what makes the crown so philosophically interesting as a corrupting force. It doesn't make you evil in the traditional sense. Ice King isn't evil, he's just broken. The crown doesn't fill you with malice or hatred or cruelty. It just replaces you with something else, something that operates by entirely different rules, something that lacks the framework to even understand human concerns. You become a force of nature, and forces of nature aren't moral or immoral, they just are. Winter doesn't hate you when it freezes you. Winter just does what winter does. Can we escape our destinies? The crown suggests no. Every timeline where the crown exists, Simon finds it and puts it on. In the main timeline, in Farmworld, in whatever other alternate realities exist, the pattern repeats. Simon and the crown are linked by something that looks like destiny, but might just be the inevitability of human curiosity encountering dangerous artifacts. The crown will always be found. Someone desperate or curious will always put it on. The corruption will always happen. You can't escape the crown any more than you can escape gravity. But here's the wrinkle. Does the crown corrupt everyone the same way? Ice King is goofy and sad, a broken man whose personality fractured into comedy and loneliness. Icefin, in his brief existence, seems more purely elemental, more completely consumed. Maybe the crown adapts to its wearer, or maybe different people resist differently, or maybe it's just random chaos in how minds break under magical assault. The crown is consistent in its corruption but varied in its results, which makes it more frightening because you can't even predict what you'll become. The crown functions in Adventure Time the way the One Ring functions in Lord of the Rings, as a symbol of power that cannot be safely wielded. Tolkien understood that some powers are inherently corrupting, that the very act of using them changes you in ways that make you unfit to have them. The ring couldn't be used for good because the act of using it was itself evil, was itself corrupting. The crown is the same. You cannot use the crown's power for good purposes because the crown's power is antithetical to goodness, to humanity, to all the qualities that make good purposes meaningful. Boromir thinks he can use the ring to save Gondor. He's wrong, and his wrongness is inevitable. Farmworld Finn thinks he can use the crown to save his family. He's wrong, and his wrongness is just as inevitable. The tragedy isn't that they're weak or foolish. The tragedy is that their situations are impossible. Their choices are impossible, and the artifact offers a solution that looks possible until the moment you accept it and realize you've already lost. Adventure Time doesn't often go this dark this explicitly, but the Crown arc, especially in Farmworld, strips away the show's usual protective layers of whimsy and forces us to confront something genuinely horrifying, the idea that love can destroy you. Finn loves his family so much that he makes the choice that damns him. Simon loved Marceline so much that he kept wearing the crown to protect her, even as it slowly erased who he was. Love motivates the corruption, which makes the corruption more painful, more tragic, more complete. The crown sits in judgment on the idea that enough love or enough desperation or enough need can justify any action. It says no. It says there are some prices that aren't worth paying, some powers that shouldn't be claimed, some sacrifices that don't save anything but instead doom everyone involved. It's a hard lesson delivered through the soft medium of a cartoon, but it lands with devastating force. Think about the crown as a physical object for a moment. It's just metal and gems. It doesn't move on its own. It doesn't speak except through its wearers. It's passive in the way objects are passive, requiring someone to pick it up, requiring volition and choice before it can do anything. But that passivity is deceptive, because the crown shapes the choices around it. Its very existence creates the conditions for someone to eventually wear it. It's patient. It's immortal. It will outlast civilizations, outlast species probably, waiting in ice or ruins or wherever it ends up, knowing that eventually desperation will bring someone to it. The crown is proof that evil doesn't need intentionality. Evil can be structural, systemic, built into objects and patterns and cycles that perpetuate themselves without anyone meaning harm. The crown corrupts not because it hates or fears or wants revenge, but because corruption is what it does, as naturally as water flows downhill. You can't reason with the crown. You can't appeal to its better nature. You can only avoid it, which requires either knowledge of what it is or lucky avoidance, and luck runs out. In Farmworld, the crown represents the final confirmation that this timeline is cursed. Because not only did preventing the bomb create a worse world, but the crown still exists in that worse world, waiting to make things even worse. There's no winning scenario here. The bomb didn't go off, humanity survived, and the crown is still available to corrupt anyone desperate enough to use it. The Lich's wish didn't create safety. It created a slow-motion catastrophe with multiple failure points, and the crown is one of them. When Finn puts on the crown in Farmworld, he's completing a pattern that was set in motion the moment Simon first found it centuries earlier. The crown creates wearers. Wearers create tragedy. Tragedy creates conditions where more desperate people might find the crown. The cycle perpetuates itself across timelines, across centuries, consuming minds and spreading winter without malice or purpose, just following its nature the way winter follows summer. And standing in the snow, transformed into something that barely remembers being human, Icefin embodies the answer to Farmworld's central question: can you escape a cursed timeline through individual action? No, because the timeline will corrupt your action, will take your heroism and twist it into horror, will use your love as the mechanism of your destruction. The crown doesn't care about your intentions. The crown just does what crowns do. So here's the existential question the crown poses. If some powers inevitably corrupt, if some forces always destroy their wielders, if some artifacts exist only to consume, what does that say about the nature of power itself? Is all power corrupting, just to different degrees? Or is the crown a special case, a singular horror, and most power can be wielded responsibly? Adventure Time seems to suggest that magical power specifically is dangerous, that it operates by rules incompatible with human well-being, but even that's not quite right, because plenty of characters in OO use magic responsibly. Maybe the crown is less about power and more about desperation. Maybe the lesson is that desperate choices made from positions of powerlessness always end badly, that true safety comes not from magical solutions, but from building systems and communities that prevent desperation in the first place. Farmworld lacks those systems. Farmworld is all desperation all the time, which makes the crown's corruption almost inevitable. Put enough desperate people in proximity to enough cursed artifacts over enough time, and eventually someone takes the cursed deal. The crown doesn't answer these questions. The crown just exists, cold and patient, waiting for the next wearer, ready to begin the corruption again. And in a multiverse of infinite timelines, there are infinite crowns, infinite Simons, infinite desperate people making the same terrible choice and learning too late that some choices can't be unmade, some transformations are permanent, and some winters never end. Icefin learned this. Simon learned this. Anyone who touches the crown learns this, though by the time they understand, they're not themselves anymore, just echoes wearing familiar faces, serving winter's eternal agenda. Can you escape your destiny if your destiny is wearing a cursed crown? Or is the curse itself the destiny? The inescapable pattern that repeats across reality because it's written into the fundamental structure of how things are. The crown doesn't care about the answer. The crown just waits in the ice, calling, promising, corrupting, eternal and patient and absolutely certain that eventually someone will make the wrong choice. And in Farmworld, wrong choices are the only kind anyone gets to make. Here's the thing about wishes. They're literal. Dangerously, catastrophically literal. When the Lich wished that the bomb never went off, Prismo didn't make the bomb disappear. He didn't erase it from existence. He didn't retroactively prevent its creation, or change the Mushroom War into something else entirely. He just stopped it from detonating at that specific moment in history. The bomb is still there, still armed, still ticking, still full of enough mutagenic payload to transform the entire planet into a nightmare of biological chaos. The wish didn't save Farmworld from the apocalypse, it just hit the snooze button, and the alarm is about to go off. Let's talk about the mushroom bomb, because understanding what it is makes the horror of Farmworld's situation much clearer. In the main timeline during the Mushroom War, humanity deployed weapons that make our current nuclear arsenals look like children's toys. These weren't just bombs that exploded and killed everything in the blast radius. These were reality-altering devices packed with mutagenic compounds that fundamentally rewrote the rules of biology in their detonation zones. The mushroom bomb was the big one, the apocalypse device, the weapon that ended human civilization and birthed something stranger in its place. When the mushroom bomb went off in the main timeline, it didn't just destroy, it transformed. The blast wave carried mutagenic particles that infected everything they touched, rewriting DNA, creating new species, giving birth to the magical weirdness that defines the land of OO. Candy people emerged from the ruins, fire elementals gained sentience, animals mutated into talking, thinking beings with societies and cultures. Magic, which had always existed in the background of reality, surged forward in the chaos, mixing with the mutagen to create combinations that shouldn't be possible according to any sane interpretation of natural law. The bomb created OO! Full stop. Without it, you don't get Princess Bubblegum Jake, the Ice Kingdom as a magical realm, any of it. The entire foundation of Adventure Time's setting rests on that moment of catastrophic transformation. The bomb was horrible, killed millions, ended a civilization, but it also reset the board, gave the world a chance to become something new. Not better necessarily, but new, with possibilities that didn't exist before. In Farmworld, that transformation never happened. The bomb exists in a bunker somewhere, probably sealed away by whatever government or military force controlled it during the war. Maybe it's in the ruins of a military base. Maybe it's buried under tons of concrete in some underground facility that was meant to survive the apocalypse it would create. The exact location doesn't matter as much as the fact that it's there, waiting, armed, ready. All it needs is the right trigger, the right circumstances, the right moment of catastrophic bad luck. Think about the psychology of living in a world where the apocalypse bomb exists but hasn't gone off. On one level, that's cause for celebration, right? We dodged the bullet. We survived. The worst didn't happen. But on another level, it's existential horror, because the bomb is still there. The threat hasn't passed. It's just been deferred. Every day that goes by is another day closer to the statistical inevitability of something going wrong, some accident or intentional act bringing about the very disaster everyone thinks they avoided. The people of Farmworld probably don't think about the bomb much. It's not part of their daily consciousness. They're too busy surviving mutants and harsh weather and scarcity to worry about some ancient weapon that may or may not still be functional after centuries of neglect. But the bomb thinks about them, in the sense that the bomb is a physical manifestation of pending doom, a Chekhov's gun hanging on the wall of reality, waiting for the third act when it finally fires. Here's where the metaphysics get interesting. Prismo's wish created a timeline where the bomb didn't detonate at its historically scheduled moment, but wishes in Adventure Time operate on specific magical rules, and those rules have loopholes. The bomb's non-detonation isn't a permanent state. It's more like a status effect, a magical pause that prevents the bomb from going off as long as the conditions of the wish remain stable. But timelines aren't stable, they're fluid, branching, subject to change and interference. When main timeline Finn enters Farmworld, when events start cascading in unexpected directions, the magical pause starts to break down. The bomb becomes a physical location in the Farmworld arc. We see it, this massive device sitting in what looks like a bunker or underground chamber, ancient technology covered in decades of dust and neglect. It's surprisingly intact given how long it's been sitting there. You'd think centuries of environmental exposure would have degraded it, but the bomb was built to survive. It's a doomsday device, designed to function even in the worst possible conditions, engineered by paranoid military minds who wanted to ensure that if humanity was going down, it could take the world with it. Looking at the bomb is like looking at frozen catastrophe. All that destructive potential locked in metal and circuits and containment vessels full of mutagenic compounds. The design is elegant in a terrible way, the kind of engineering beauty that goes into weapons of mass destruction. Everything about it speaks to careful planning, to scientists and technicians who knew exactly what they were creating, and built it anyway because war makes people do things they know they shouldn't. The mutagenic payload inside the bomb is what makes it special. Regular nuclear weapons just explode, release radiation, kill through heat and blast and fallout. The mushroom bomb does all that, but adds a biological component, a cocktail of engineered pathogens and DNA-altering chemicals that transform whatever they touch. The science here is Adventure Time science, which means it's simultaneously nonsensical and weirdly consistent. The mutagen doesn't just randomly scramble genetics, it has purpose, or at least directionality, pushing organisms toward new forms that somehow remain viable, that can survive and reproduce and create new species. In the main timeline, when the bomb went off, the mutagen spread worldwide. It infected humans, animals, plants, even bacteria and viruses. Everything got the mutation treatment, everything got reshuffled into new combinations. Some mutations were beneficial, creating beings with intelligence and abilities they didn't have before. Some were neutral, just weird. Some were horrible, creating monsters and abominations. But all of them were transformative. All of them pushed life in new directions. And that transformation is what allowed the land of Oo to emerge from the ashes of human civilization. The mutants we see in Farmworld are the result of localized mutagenic exposure from other sources. Chemical weapons, biological experiments, industrial pollution that got weaponized during the war. They're mutants, but they're not mutants. They lack the magical spark, the whimsical quality that makes even dangerous creatures in feel like they belong to a fairy tale. Farmworld mutants are just aggressive, damaged animals operating on instinct, lacking personality or society or anything that would make them characters rather than obstacles. But if the bomb goes off in Farmworld, everything changes. The scale of mutation would be planetary, instant, total. Every living thing would be hit with the full force of the mutagenic transformation, and in a world that lacks the magical infrastructure of that transformation would be even more chaotic, even more unpredictable. Farmworld doesn't have wizards to help manage the magical surge. It doesn't have ancient cosmic entities maintaining balance. It just has confused, mutating humans and animals. Trying to survive changes their biology was never meant to handle. Picture what happens when the bomb finally detonates. The blast itself levels everything in a massive radius, just like a regular nuclear explosion. The mushroom cloud rises, iconic and terrible, carrying mutagenic particles into the upper atmosphere where winds will spread them globally. The immediate detonation zone becomes a crater of twisted reality, where the laws of physics and biology have been rewritten so dramatically that normal life can't exist there. This is ground zero, the epicenter of transformation, and it's beautiful and horrifying in equal measure. Then the mutations begin. Animals caught in the blast wave start changing immediately, their bodies reshaping, their minds expanding or contracting, or simply breaking under the strain of forced evolution. Humans in the outer zones feel it slower, a creeping sensation as their cells begin rewriting themselves, as the mutagen works its way through their systems. Some transformations are quick, violent reshapings that leave new creatures where humans once stood. Others are gradual, taking hours or days, giving the victim time to feel everything that's happening to them, to watch themselves becoming something else in real time. The mutation doesn't follow any predictable pattern, because it's interacting with existing biology, with environmental factors, with pure chaos. Two humans standing next to each other might mutate in completely different directions. One might become something strong and viable, a new species with its own advantages. The other might become something broken, a body that can't support its own weight, a mind that fragments under impossible contradictions. The mutagen is creative but not merciful. It generates variety without regard for whether that variety can actually survive. Plants mutate too. Forests transform overnight into alien landscapes of twisted vegetation. Trees that shouldn't be able to photosynthesize but do anyway. Grasses that move on their own. Flowers that scream or sing or pulse with bioluminescence. The entire ecosystem gets scrambled and redealt, creating combinations that have never existed before and may never exist again. Some of these mutant plants are useful, producing food or medicine or materials humans can use. Others are deadly. They are releasing toxins or growing thorns that can pierce metal or simply spreading so aggressively they choke out everything else. The ocean isn't spared. Marine life mutates into new forms, creating creatures that are part fish, part nightmare, part something that doesn't have a name. The mutagenic spread through water is actually faster than through air because liquids carry particles efficiently, which means coastal areas get hit with mutation waves from both the airborne spread and the waterborne contamination. Islands find themselves dealing with mutant marine life crawling ashore, evolved for amphibious existence, driven by instincts that no longer match their original species. But here's the cruel irony that makes Farmworld's situation so darkly funny in its tragedy. The Lich's wish was supposed to prevent the apocalypse, and instead it just changed the apocalypse's timeline. The bomb going off in Farmworld happens later than it did in the main timeline, which means it happens to people who thought they'd escaped it. The psychological impact is worse because there was hope. There was the belief that humanity had dodged the worst, that they'd survived the mushroom war through luck or divine intervention or whatever explanation made sense. And then the bomb finally goes off anyway, and that hope retroactively becomes delusion. Imagine being a Farmworld citizen who spent their whole life hearing stories about how the bomb didn't go off, how humanity survived, how they were the lucky ones. Then one day you see the mushroom cloud rising on the horizon, and you realise we weren't lucky. We just had a longer wait before the end came. The hope was false. The survival was temporary. The bomb was always going to detonate, always going to transform the world, and all that happened was a delay that made the eventual impact hurt more, because it came after people had allowed themselves to believe in safety. The Lich understood this, which is why the wish was so perfectly malicious. The Lich doesn't just want death. The Lich wants the death of hope, the demonstration that extinction is inevitable, that all of existence is just a temporary postponement of entropy. By making the bomb not go off immediately, the Lich created conditions where hope could flourish, where people could build lives and have families and think about futures, all while the bomb sat waiting to destroy everything they'd constructed. That's more cruel than immediate annihilation. That's torture disguised as mercy. From a physics perspective, or at least Adventure Time physics, the bomb's detonation creates a kind of magical /scientific cascade. The initial blast releases energy and mutagenic particles simultaneously. The energy provides the force for transformation, literally powering the biological changes at a cellular level. The particles provide the template, the instructions for what kinds of mutations are possible. Together they create conditions where evolution that should take millions of years happens in minutes, where species barriers dissolve, where the fundamental categories of life become suggestions rather than rules. There's also a temporal component to the mutation. Some creatures age rapidly, going through multiple generations in hours, each generation adapting to the new reality faster than the last. Other creatures stop aging entirely, locked in perpetual youth or perpetual decay depending on how the mutagen affects their cellular regeneration. Time itself becomes weird in heavily mutated zones, not flowing differently exactly, but experienced differently by organisms whose biological clocks have been reset or randomized. The psychological effects of mutation are often overlooked but equally devastating. When your body changes, your brain changes with it. New instincts emerge, old memories get overwritten or simply stop making sense because the brain that created them no longer exists. Some mutants retain full intelligence and personality, like Jake did in the main timeline. Others lose everything that made them individuals, becoming purely instinctual creatures driven by basic needs. There's no way to predict which outcome any given person will experience, which makes the moment of mutation an existential gamble, where you might win and become something amazing, or lose and stop being you entirely. Farmworld's mutation, when it happens, lacks the mitigating factors that made U possible. In the main timeline, ancient magical beings like Marceline survived the bomb, providing some continuity with the pre-war world. Powerful entities like the Cosmic Owl and Prismo and Death himself maintained the fundamental structures of reality, even as surface conditions transformed. Magic users who survived used their power to create pockets of stability, like Princess Bubblegum eventually did with the Candy Kingdom. These stabilizing forces allowed U to emerge as something functional, weird but viable, chaotic but sustainable. Farmworld has none of this infrastructure. The magical beings that exist in the main timeline either don't exist here or died long ago. There's no Marceline to remember what came before, no Princess Bubblegum to scientifically manage the mutation, no support structure to help the transformed world organize itself into something resembling civilization. Farmworld's post-bomb landscape would be pure chaos, mutations without guidance, new species without culture or history, just billions of confused organisms trying to survive in bodies and minds they don't understand. The bomb becomes a character in its own right, sitting there in its bunker, representing inevitability. It's Chekhov's gun made literal, Schrödinger's apocalypse existing in a state of both detonated and not detonated, until someone collapses the quantum state. The tension of its existence hangs over Farmworld like a sword suspended by thread, and everyone who knows about the bomb lives with the knowledge that the thread is fraying, that eventually, inevitably, the sword will fall. Real-world nuclear anxiety probably informs how Adventure Time handles the bomb. We live in a world where nuclear weapons exist, where the capacity for instant global annihilation is maintained by multiple nations, where the apocalypse is always just a few bad decisions away. That anxiety, that existential dread of living under the nuclear sword translates into Farmworld's narrative. The show takes our real fear and literalizes it, gives it weight and presence and eventual activation. The bomb isn't abstract, it's physical, visible, ticking. When the bomb finally does go off in the Farmworld arc, it happens because of a chain of events set in motion by the Lich possessing Jake, by Finn's transformation into Ice Finn, by main timeline Finn's presence destabilising the timeline. It's chaos begetting chaos, small actions cascading into catastrophic consequences. The bomb doesn't detonate because someone maliciously sets it off. It detonates because reality in Farmworld has become too unstable, too contradictory, and the bomb responds to that instability by doing what bombs do: exploding. The aftermath is immediate and total. Farmworld as it existed ceases to exist. The landscape transforms, the people transform. The entire nature of reality in that timeline shifts from survival horror to mutation chaos. If anyone survives with their minds intact, they wake up in a world that makes even less sense than before, where the rules have changed again, and adaptation means accepting that you might not be human anymore, might not even be you anymore, might just be a new creature wearing your memories like ill-fitting clothes. And here's the final irony. This transformation, horrible as it is, might actually be an improvement. Farmworld pre-bomb is stagnant, dying slowly, grinding toward extinction through attrition. Farmworld post-bomb is chaotic but full of possibility, mutating and evolving and creating new forms of life that might eventually build something better than what came before. The bomb destroys, but it also creates. It ends humanity's dominance but opens doors for other forms of consciousness, other types of civilization. Maybe in 1,000 years, Farmworld becomes something like Ooh, weird and magical and full of life, all because the bomb finally went off and forced transformation instead of allowing slow decay. But that's cold comfort to the people who live through the blast, who watch themselves mutate, who lose their families to transformation or death or mutation so extreme that recognition becomes impossible. The bomb doesn't care about eventual outcomes. The bomb just does what bombs do, operating on timescales of microseconds, releasing energy and particles and transformation without concern for consequences or meaning, or the stories people tell themselves about survival and hope. In Farmworld, the bomb is proof that you can't cheat cosmic consequences. You can delay them, postpone them, wish them away temporarily, but reality has a way of reasserting itself. The apocalypse that was supposed to happen will happen, just later, just differently, just in a way that makes the delay feel like false hope rather than real salvation. The Lich knew this. Prismo knew this. The cosmic order itself knows this. Only the inhabitants of Farmworld thought they'd escaped, and their realization that they haven't, that they never did, that the bomb was always going to go off and the transformation was always inevitable, is the final cruelty of the timeline. So the bomb sits in its bunker, ancient and patient and loaded with the power to rewrite reality. It doesn't tick audibly because it's not that kind of device, but metaphorically it ticks with every passing day, counting down to a detonation that was delayed but never cancelled, postponed but always certain. And when it finally explodes, when Farmworld gets the apocalypse it thought it had avoided, the mushroom cloud rises into a grey sky like a monument to the idea that some fates are inescapable. The disaster that didn't happen, but did. The bomb that never went off but always would. The apocalypse that was prevented until it wasn't. Welcome to Farmworld, where even the things you successfully avoid end up destroying you eventually. Turns out, snoozing the alarm just means you're asleep when the world ends. And the mushroom cloud doesn't care if you're awake or not. It rises anyway, beautiful and terrible, spreading mutation like a gift nobody wanted but everyone gets. At least when your body starts changing, you can take comfort knowing the Lich was right. Extinction isn't just inevitable, it's patient enough to wait for you to think you've escaped before it catches up, and reminds you that in the cosmic game of survival, the house always wins. And the house is on fire, and the fire is made of mutagen. And you're probably going to grow extra limbs before this is over. Hope that's comforting. Jake the dog is supposed to be Finn's brother. Not biologically, obviously, because one is human and one is a magical talking dog with stretchy powers, but in every way that matters. Jake is supposed to be the voice of reason when Finn gets too intense, the comic relief when things get dark, the wisdom-dispensing older brother who's seen more of life and learned to appreciate its simple pleasures. Jake is supposed to make bacon pancakes, quote his dad's old saying about sucking, and occasionally turn into furniture. Jake is supposed to be there, always, grounding Finn, making him better, helping him navigate the weird world of ooh with humour and love and unconditional support. Farmworld Jake is none of these things, and that's before the Lich gets involved. Let's start with who Farmworld Jake actually is, because the differences are telling. He exists, which is already surprising given how different this timeline is. He still has his stretchy powers, that magical ability to reshape his body into any configuration, to grow huge or shrink tiny, to become a bridge or a shield or a boat or whatever the situation requires. This suggests the magic that gave Jake his abilities is fundamental enough that even in a timeline without the Mushroom Bomb's transformative blast, it still manifested somehow. Maybe his father still got exposed to mutagenic material from those other weapons we talked about. Maybe shape-shifting dogs just exist in the Adventure Time multiverse, regardless of apocalyptic circumstances. The how doesn't matter as much as the fact that he has powers. But Jake's personality is different. He's not the laid-back philosopher warrior of the main timeline. He's rougher, more aggressive, shaped by Farmworld's harsh reality into something harder. You can see it in how he carries himself, in the edge to his voice, in the way he interacts with others. This Jake has lived his whole life in survival mode, and survival mode doesn't leave much room for making bacon pancakes and philosophizing about the nature of existence. This Jake probably has a family, kids of his own, responsibilities that weigh on him. He's doing the same thing Farmworld Finn is doing, trying to keep people alive in a world that wants them dead. There's no indication that Farmworld Jake and Farmworld Finn have the close relationship their main timeline counterparts share. They might know each other, might even be friends of a sort, but they're not brothers. They weren't raised together. They don't have decades of shared adventures creating unbreakable bonds. They're just two people living in the same terrible world, both trying to survive, occasionally crossing paths but not fundamentally intertwined in each other's destinies. The absence of that brotherhood changes everything about who both of them are, but for Jake specifically, it means he lacks the anchor that keeps main timeline Jake grounded in goodness. Jake probably lives somewhere in one of the settlements, maybe with his own farm, maybe doing mercenary work protecting caravans from mutants, maybe just scraping by like everyone else. His stretchy powers make him valuable in Farmworld's economy of violence and survival. He can fight mutants more effectively than baseline humans. He can reach things in dangerous ruins without putting himself at risk. He can carry more supplies, build stronger defenses, do 100 practical things that normal people can't. This makes him useful, maybe even respected, but it also marks him as different, as other, as something that's not quite baseline human even though he talks and thinks like a person. Being different in a world that's already hostile is dangerous. People fear what they don't understand, and Jake's powers definitely fall into the category of things that don't make sense to Farmworld's more mundane reality. He's probably dealt with suspicion, maybe even persecution, from humans who see his abilities as evidence of mutation or contamination. This would make him defensive, guarded, less likely to trust others or form deep connections. It would reinforce the hardness we see in his character, the sense that he's learned to rely primarily on himself because other people are unreliable at best and hostile at worst. Then the Lich arrives, and Jake becomes something so much worse than anything he ever was or could have been on his own. The Lich is primordial evil, the first manifestation of entropy and death, an entity that exists to end existence itself. In the main timeline, the Lich is terrifying but manageable within the context of Adventure Time's mythology. He's a villain, a recurring threat, something that can be fought and defeated and imprisoned, at least temporarily. He's powerful, but he's also limited by his physical form, by the heroes who oppose him, by the basic narrative structure that says villains can be overcome through courage and friendship and determination. In Farmworld, the Lich doesn't have those limitations. There's no heroic infrastructure to oppose him, no Princess Bubblegum with her scientific genius, no Ice King with his chaotic magic, no Marceline who's seen enough evil to recognize it and fight it. Just desperate humans and one magical dog, and the Lich sees opportunity in that dog, sees a vessel that could be shaped into something perfectly suited for spreading death and entropy across this already dying world. Possession isn't the right word for what happens to Jake, but it's the closest we have. The Lich doesn't just take control of Jake's body like a parasite controlling a host. The Lich merges with Jake, fuses with him on a fundamental level, creating something that's neither fully Lich nor fully Jake, but a horrifying synthesis of both. Imagine your consciousness remaining partially intact while another consciousness, ancient and malevolent and utterly inhuman, moves in and starts rearranging your thoughts, your memories, your sense of self. Imagine feeling yourself getting overwritten but not deleted entirely, becoming part of something larger and more terrible, while fragments of who you were scream silently inside the merged entity. That's what happens to Jake, and it's so much worse than death. The physical transformation is immediate and grotesque. Jake's body, already capable of remarkable plasticity thanks to his stretchy powers, becomes a canvas for the Lich's corruption. His yellow fur darkens, taking on a sickly greenish tint like flesh beginning to rot. His face elongates, features stretching into something that barely resembles a dog anymore. Something more skeletal, more death-like, more fundamentally wrong. His eyes, normally warm and expressive, become empty sockets that glow with the Lich's characteristic green light. Twin points of malevolent intelligence staring out from a face that shouldn't be capable of expression, but somehow conveys infinite malice. Jake's body grows massive, the Lich using his stretching powers but amplifying them beyond anything Jake could achieve on his own. The merged form towers over buildings, a giant mockery of the friendly dog Jake once was, all the comforting qualities inverted into nightmare fuel. The body has Jake's basic shape. Enough resemblance that you can tell what it used to be, but every detail is wrong, corrupted, transformed into something that hurts to look at. Flesh that shouldn't be visible is visible. Bones that should be internal press against the skin. The physiology is impossible but functional, powered by magic that doesn't care about biological constraints. The worst part is that Jake is still in there. The Lich doesn't completely erase him because the Lich doesn't need to. Having Jake's consciousness trapped inside the merged form, aware of everything the Lich-Jake hybrid does but powerless to stop it, is more cruel than simply killing him would be. Jake gets to watch as his body is used to spread destruction, as his powers serve entropy, as everything he ever was gets weaponized against the world. He's a prisoner in his own flesh, screaming without voice, trying to resist without any leverage, slowly going mad from the horror of his situation. Can you imagine that? Being aware as your hands, your Jake hands that used to make pancakes and hug your kids and help people, are used to kill. Being aware as your voice, your Jake voice that used to crack jokes and give advice and say, dude, and sucking at something is the first step to being sorta good at something, is used to pronounce death sentences and spread the Lich's gospel of extinction. Being aware as your very existence becomes a weapon, aimed at everything you ever cared about. That's Jake's hell. And unlike traditional hell, there's no fire and brimstone, no obvious torture devices. Just the endless experience of being used, of betraying yourself involuntarily, of becoming the opposite of everything you ever wanted to be. The Lich-Jake hybrid has powers that neither entity possess separately. The Lich's magical corruption combined with Jake's stretching abilities creates something uniquely dangerous. The merged form can extend tendrils of rotting flesh across vast distances, infecting whatever they touch with the Lich's death magic. It can grow spikes of bone that pierce through any defense. It can reshape itself into forms optimized for killing, biological weapons limited only by imagination and magical fuel. The stretching that was once whimsical and useful becomes horrifying, flesh warping in ways that violate every expectation of how bodies should work. But it's not just physical power. The Lich brings knowledge, ancient and terrible knowledge about death and entropy, and the fundamental weaknesses of living things. Combined with Jake's intelligence and creativity, this knowledge becomes actionable in new ways. The Lich-Jake hybrid is smart, strategic, capable of planning and adapting and using tactics that the regular Lich, trapped in his more rigid undead form, couldn't manage. It's the difference between a battering ram and a scalpel. The regular Lich is blunt force trauma. Lich-Jake is precision devastation. The hybrid also has Jake's memories, his knowledge of Farmworld, his understanding of how humans in this timeline think and operate. This makes it more effective at hunting survivors, at finding weaknesses in defenses, at predicting where people will run and cutting them off before they get there. Every piece of information Jake ever learned, every relationship he ever formed, becomes intelligence the Lich can exploit. If Jake knew where settlements keep their food stores, the Lich knows. If Jake knew which ruins were safe to hide in, the Lich knows. Jake's entire life becomes ammunition against the people he might have cared about. Compare this to the regular Lich and the differences are stark. The Lich in his classic form is powerful but limited by his undead physiology. He can't stretch or reshape himself. His magic is focused on death and corruption, but lacks the versatility Jake's body provides. He's also more predictable in some ways, following patterns established over eons of existence, operating according to ancient principles. Lich Jake is unpredictable because it's a fusion of ancient evil and Jake's spontaneous creativity, cosmic hatred powered by magical shape-shifting dog biology. The emotional devastation this causes cannot be overstated. In the main timeline, Jake is Finn's rock, his anchor, the one constant in a world of weirdness. Losing Jake would destroy Finn, but at least it would be comprehensible loss. Death happens, people die, you grieve and eventually accept and move forward. But watching Jake transform into the ultimate evil, watching your brother or friend become a monster, watching someone you love be used as a weapon against everything good in the world, that's not loss you can process normally. That's trauma on a fundamental level. If Farmworld Finn encounters Lich Jake, and he probably does at some point in the timeline's progression, imagine the psychological damage. Even if they weren't as close as their main timeline counterparts, Jake was still someone Finn knew, maybe respected, maybe even liked in a distant way. Seeing him transformed, seeing his body puppeteered by evil, knowing that somewhere inside that horror show Jake might still be aware and suffering, would break something essential in anyone witnessing it. It's the kind of thing that makes you question whether resistance is even possible, whether hope has any meaning in a universe that can do this to people. The philosophical horror here is about loss of self, about the question of whether identity persists when it's been merged with something antithetical to everything you are. Is Lich Jake still Jake in any meaningful sense? His body is there, his memories are accessible, but his will is subsumed. His choices are not his own. His consciousness is either overwritten or trapped or scattered across the merged entity in ways that make selfhood meaningless. At what point does corruption become so complete that the original person is effectively dead, even though their body walks around doing terrible things? This ties into deeper questions about consciousness and identity that Adventure Time loves to explore. If you gradually replace someone's neurons one at a time with artificial equivalents that function identically, at what point do they stop being themselves? If you merge two consciousnesses into one, which one is the real person afterward? Lich Jake exists in that philosophical space where definitions of personhood break down, where the categories we use to understand identity stop being useful because the situation is too extreme for normal frameworks. And Jake never wanted any of this. That's crucial. He wasn't a villain who chose corruption. He wasn't a hero who made a tragic sacrifice. He was just a person, or a magical dog person, living his life and surviving in Farmworld the best he knew how, and then evil came for him without warning or negotiation or choice. The Lich didn't ask permission. The Lich just took, the way powerful entities always take from the powerless, the way tragedy arrives uninvited and rewrites reality without caring about consent or fairness or the preferences of the people being consumed. If Jake could speak, if his voice could somehow emerge from the Lich-Jake hybrid, what would he say? Would he beg for death? Would he warn people to run? Would he apologize for what his body's doing even though it's not his fault? Or would the merging be so complete that Jake's voice is impossible, that the synthesis has created something that truly is neither Jake nor the Lich, but a third entity that never asked to exist and operates according to its own terrible logic? The Lich chose Jake for practical reasons. Jake has stretchy powers, magical abilities that make him valuable as a vessel. Jake exists in Farmworld where opposition is minimal, where the Lich can operate more freely than in the heavily magical main timeline. But maybe there's also a perverse cosmic justice in it, the universe's way of saying that even in a timeline designed to prevent apocalypse, corruption will find a vessel, evil will manifest, and the things you love will be twisted into weapons against you. Jake becomes living proof that Farmworld's reprieve was temporary, that the forces of entropy don't respect wishes or timelines or desperate hopes for survival. The tragedy compounds when you remember that main timeline Jake eventually becomes something cosmic and wonderful. He goes on adventures with his kids, learns to appreciate life's complexity, has this whole arc of growth and wisdom. Eventually, through timeline shenanigans and reincarnation cycles, Jake becomes part of the universe's fundamental structure in ways that are weird and beautiful and very Adventure Time. His destiny in the main timeline is to become more than he was, to transcend limitations, to prove that goofiness and wisdom can coexist in the same magical dog. Farmworld Jake's destiny is to become a meat puppet for primordial evil. Same soul, a different timeline, completely opposite outcome. One Jake ascends, one Jake is consumed. The multiverse doesn't play favourites, doesn't care about potential or goodness or who deserves what. It just branches into infinite possibilities, and some of those possibilities are nightmares. Standing before Lich Jake, looking up at the towering horror that was once a person, you'd feel the wrongness radiating from it like heat from a fire. Not just the visual wrongness of corrupted flesh and impossible anatomy, but the metaphysical wrongness of an entity that shouldn't exist, that violates fundamental principles about identity and agency and the sanctity of consciousness. The air around it probably smells wrong, tastes wrong, feels wrong against your skin. Reality itself recoils from the Lich Jake hybrid because what it represents, the forced merger of incompatible existences, is offensive to the basic structure of how things should be. And somewhere deep inside that horror, buried under layers of Lich consciousness and corrupted magic and entropy given form, maybe Jake is still there, still aware, still screaming. Or maybe he's not. Maybe the merger was so complete that Jake ceased to exist the moment it happened, and what remains is just biological memory, neural patterns firing in ways that resemble thought, but lack true consciousness. Both possibilities are equally terrible. Either Jake suffers forever, or Jake died but his body didn't, which means the universe is cruel enough to erase people while keeping their flesh animated as mockery. The Lich Jake hybrid represents the ultimate theft. Not just your life, not just your body, but your very self, your identity, everything that makes you you, all of it stolen and repurposed for evil. It's the kind of violation that makes death seem merciful by comparison. The kind of fate that makes you understand why some philosophies consider non-existence preferable to corrupted existence. For Farmworld as a timeline, losing Jake this way destroys any remaining hope. If someone with magical powers, someone who should have been able to resist or escape or at least fight back, can be consumed this easily, what chance do ordinary humans have? The Lich Jake hybrid becomes a walking demonstration of Farmworld's fundamental hopelessness, proof that even your protectors can be turned into your destroyers, that power in this timeline always eventually serves entropy, that resistance is not just futile but actively counterproductive, because the Lich will just use your resistance as fuel for corruption. It's cosmic horror in cartoon form, the fear not of dying but of having your death be the best case scenario, of having your continued existence be worse than annihilation, the fear that you could become something you'd want killed if you could see yourself from the outside, the fear that the universe is so fundamentally broken that love and goodness and heroism are just resources waiting to be harvested by evil. Jake deserved better, not because he was special or chosen or destined for greatness, but because everyone deserves better than being conscripted as a weapon for extinction. Everyone deserves the basic dignity of dying as themselves rather than living as someone else's tool. But Farmworld doesn't care about what anyone deserves. Farmworld is the timeline where wishes go wrong, where hope becomes cruel, where even magical talking dogs with stretchy powers end up serving entropy. And the worst part is knowing that in another timeline, in the main timeline, Jake is probably making breakfast right now, probably cracking jokes, probably being himself in all his goofy, wise, wonderful glory. The same soul, the same essential Jakeness, having a completely different experience just because of where the multiverse's random branch took him. One version gets to be a hero's brother and best friend. Another version gets to be a horror show. Which one is the real Jake? Both. Neither. The question stops making sense when identity becomes timeline dependent, when the person you are is contingent on which branch of reality you ended up in. Jake is simultaneously the best friend anyone could ask for and the worst nightmare Farmworld ever faced. And both versions are equally valid because the multiverse doesn't believe in consistency, only in infinite variation. So when you see the Lich Jake hybrid shambling across Farmworld's wasteland, spreading corruption and death, remember that inside that horror was a person, or a dog person, who probably just wanted to live his life, protect his family, Maybe make some pancakes if ingredients were available. Remember that becoming a monster doesn't require choosing evil, just being in the wrong place at the wrong time when cosmic forces need a vessel. Remember that the real horror isn't the body count or the destruction, or even the apocalyptic implications. The real horror is the theft of selfhood, the forced transformation of person into weapon, the knowledge that your hands are killing and you can't stop them, or worse, that you're not even there anymore to care about what your hands are doing. Remember Jake, not just what he became, but what he was before corruption claimed him. Because in Farmworld, even memories of goodness are rare enough to be precious, and Jake deserved to be remembered as more than the host body for ultimate evil. Even if all that remains is the horror of what he became somewhere in the branching timelines, there's a Jake making bacon pancakes and being someone's best friend. And maybe that's comfort enough. Or maybe it just makes the tragedy worse, knowing what was lost, knowing what could have been, knowing that consciousness and identity and selfhood are all so fragile that ancient evil can just reach out and claim them whenever it wants. Either way, the Lich-Jake hybrid stands as testament to Farmworld's central truth. In this timeline, everything good eventually gets corrupted. Everything pure eventually gets twisted, and even magical dogs aren't safe from the entropy that waits patiently for its turn to consume. Jake the dog became Jake the horror. Same stretchy powers, different master, and somewhere in the existential space between those two states of being, the real Jake either suffered forever or ceased to exist. Which fate is worse probably depends on your philosophy about consciousness and suffering and whether being erased is preferable to being trapped. But in Farmworld, you don't get to choose your fate. You just get to experience it, for however long experience remains possible before the Lich finishes his work and all of existence finally goes quiet. At least Jake won't be alone in that silence. Everyone else in Farmworld is heading there too. Let's talk about a question that keeps philosophers employed and everyone else awake at 3 a.m. Do we actually choose anything? Or are we just playing out scripts written by forces we can't see and wouldn't understand if we could? It's the free will versus determinism debate. And Farmworld is Adventure Time's way of dramatizing this question through the most brutal thought experiment possible. What if the hero always makes the wrong choice? Not because they're weak or evil, but because that's what the timeline requires. Think about Farmworld Finn reaching for the crown. We've established the context, the desperation, the impossible situation that pushes him toward that choice. But here's the deeper question. Could he have chosen differently? Was there ever a moment, even a fraction of a second, where alternate possibilities existed and Finn could have walked away from the crown and found some other solution? Or was the act of reaching for the crown predetermined from the moment the Lich made his wish, from the moment Prismo granted it, from the moment this timeline branched off from the main continuity? If you believe in pure free will, then Finn absolutely could have chosen differently. The crown was just an object sitting in the snow. No one forced his hand. No external compulsion made his fingers close around the metal. He made a choice, and choices are the essence of free will, the thing that makes us moral agents capable of being responsible for our actions. Finn chose the crown. Therefore Finn is responsible for everything that follows. End of discussion. But if you believe in determinism, if you think the universe operates according to cause and effect chains that stretch back to the beginning of time and forward to whatever ending existence eventually reaches, then Finn never really had a choice. His brain state in that moment, shaped by every experience he'd ever had in Farmworld, by his neurochemistry, by the exact configuration of atoms in his body and the environment around him, by quantum states and probability waves and the fundamental laws of physics, made the crown-grabbing outcome inevitable. You could rewind time and replay that moment 1 trillion times, and every single time Finn would reach for the crown, because that's what the causal chain produces when you run it forward from those initial conditions. Adventure Time seems to suggest something more complicated than either pure free will or pure determinism. The show presents a multiverse where both things are somehow true simultaneously, where choices matter but patterns repeat, where characters have agency but cosmic forces shape outcomes in ways that make certain events feel inevitable, even when they technically don't have to be. Consider the crown itself across multiple timelines. In every version of reality we see where the crown exists, Simon Petrikov finds it and puts it on. Not because Simon is weak or stupid, but because the circumstances that lead to that moment seem to reconstruct themselves across timelines. Simon is always an antiquarian or scholar. He's always in a position to discover ancient artifacts. He's always curious enough to try the crown on. The specific details vary, but the pattern repeats. Is that destiny? Or is it just that certain personality types combined with certain circumstances reliably produce certain outcomes, and calling it destiny is just how we make sense of statistical inevitability? Farmworld adds another layer by showing us Finn, a character we know from the main timeline as someone capable of heroism and good choices, making a terrible choice. Same soul, same fundamental character, different circumstances, completely opposite outcome. This suggests that character isn't destiny, that who you are doesn't determine what you do as much as the situation you're in. Farmworld Finn isn't morally weaker than main timeline Finn. He's just trapped in worse circumstances with fewer good options, and the lack of good options eventually produces the bad choice. But then you have to ask, are circumstances just another form of determinism? If your environment shapes your choices, and you don't choose your environment, then are you really choosing at all? Or are you just responding to inputs the way a complex biological machine responds, with the illusion of choice created by the fact that you can't see all the causal chains that led to your decision? The Lich's wish complicates this further, because it's an intentional alteration of the timeline by a cosmic entity. The Lich makes a wish, Prismo grants it, and suddenly Farmworld exists as a branch where the bomb didn't go off. Did the Lich have free will in making that wish? He's described as a cosmic force, as entropy given consciousness, as something that exists to end existence. If that's his nature, his fundamental essence, then choosing to wish for something that causes maximum suffering and death isn't really a choice, it's just the Lich being what he is. A lion isn't making a moral choice when it kills a gazelle, it's just expressing its nature. Is the Lich any different? And what about Prismo? He's bound by cosmic law, by the rules of wish granting that exist independently of his preferences. When the Lich makes his wish, Prismo has to grant it according to the specific magical parameters that govern his existence. He can interpret the wish, find loopholes, maybe warn about consequences, but he can't just refuse. Is that free will? Or is Prismo a deterministic process dressed up as a person, executing cosmic code without real agency? The hero's journey, that classic narrative structure where someone ordinary becomes extraordinary through trials and growth, gets completely inverted in Farmworld. Joseph Campbell's monomyth says the hero leaves the ordinary world, faces challenges, gains wisdom and power, then returns transformed to benefit their community. Farmworld Finn never leaves his ordinary world. His entire life is the ordinary world. Farming and survival with no call to adventure because adventure doesn't exist in his reality. When he finally does encounter something that could be read as a call to adventure, the crown, accepting that call destroys him, instead of transforming him heroically. This inversion asks whether the hero's journey is a universal pattern, or just something that works in specific circumstances. Maybe heroism requires a world that supports heroism, that provides the structure for heroes to emerge. Main timeline, Finn becomes a hero because Ooh is a world where heroism is possible, where there are princesses to save and evils to fight, and magical swords to find. Farmworld doesn't have that infrastructure, so the same person with the same potential just becomes a farmer who eventually makes a desperate mistake. There's Buddhist philosophy embedded in this too, the idea that suffering comes from attachment, from clinging to things that are impermanent and trying to control outcomes that can't be controlled. Farmworld Finn's attachment to his family, his desperate need to protect them, is what drives him to the crown. In Buddhist terms, his attachment creates suffering for himself and others. If he could have practiced non-attachment, accepted that loss is part of existence, maybe he wouldn't have reached for corrupting power, but that's asking a lot. That's asking someone to watch their family die and just be okay with it, because attachment is the source of suffering. Most philosophies recognize that as unrealistic at best and monstrous at worst. Existentialism offers a different lens. Sartre said existence precedes essence, that we're not born with predetermined natures but create ourselves through our choices. By that logic, Farmworld Finn creates himself as the kind of person who chooses power over principle when pushed hard enough. That's not weakness, that's just honest self-creation in impossible circumstances. He faced the absurdity of existence in a dying world and made a choice that defined him. The choice was terrible, but it was his, and that ownership of even terrible choices is what makes us human according to existentialist thought. But Adventure Time's cosmology includes literal cosmic beings who shape reality. Prismo, the cosmic owl, death. These aren't metaphors or abstract forces, they're characters who exist and intervene and make decisions that affect entire timelines. Like, when cosmic beings are real and active, how much room is left for human free will? If Prismo can grant wishes that rewrite reality, if the cosmic owl dreams true prophecies, if death decides when people die, then humans are operating within constraints they can't see and can't resist. You might feel like you're choosing, but your choices are only possible within the framework cosmic beings have established. Farmworld exists because the Lich wished it into existence and Prismo granted that wish. Every person in Farmworld, every choice they make, every consequence that follows, all of it happens downstream from those two cosmic acts. Does that mean Farmworld's inhabitants are less real, less free, than people in other timelines? Are they philosophical zombies acting out a script without real consciousness? Or does consciousness emerge regardless of how the timeline was created, making their experiences and choices just as valid and free as anyone else's? The Enchiridion, that book of heroic wisdom that appears in both timelines, offers guidance about choice and consequence. It teaches that heroes choose the hard right over the easy wrong, that strength comes from discipline and virtue, that the path of good is narrow and difficult. But the Enchiridion was written for a world where heroism is possible, where good and evil are clear categories and right choices exist even if they're hard. What's a hero supposed to do when no right choices exist, when every option leads to suffering, when the hard right and the easy wrong both produce terrible outcomes? Farmworld doesn't have answers the Enchiridion can address, because Farmworld is the edge case, the scenario where traditional heroic wisdom breaks down. You can't tell Farmworld Finn to choose good over evil when the choice is between let your family die and corrupt yourself to save them temporarily. Neither option is good. Both are evil in different ways. The Enchiridion wasn't written for worlds this broken. Here's where it gets really twisty. Can love and duty be more dangerous than selfishness? In normal moral frameworks, love and duty are virtues, things we should cultivate and act from. But Farmworld suggests that in sufficiently extreme circumstances, love and duty can drive you to choices worse than selfishness would produce. If Farmworld Finn were selfish, if he cared only about his own survival and comfort, he might have avoided the crown entirely. Why risk corruption for other people when you could just run away and save yourself? His love for his family, his sense of duty to protect them, those virtuous motivations push him toward the crown. Virtue causes the corruption. This is a legitimately unsettling moral inversion. It suggests that right motivations don't guarantee right actions, that good intentions can lead to hell more efficiently than bad intentions, that the universe sometimes punishes virtue more harshly than vice. It's the opposite of karma, the opposite of just world theory, the opposite of most religious and philosophical frameworks that try to assure us that goodness eventually prevails. Farmworld says no. Sometimes goodness gets you corrupted by ancient evil, and your virtue becomes the mechanism of your destruction. Now let's apply this to Jake and his possession by the Lich. Was Jake destined to become the Lich's vessel? Did his magical powers and his existence in Farmworld make that outcome inevitable? Or could events have unfolded differently? Could Jake have avoided the Lich somehow, and we're only seeing one possible path among many? The show doesn't give us enough information to answer definitively, which might be the point. Maybe the uncertainty is the message. The idea that we can never know whether outcomes were predetermined or contingent, whether our choices mattered or were just the universe executing its program. We live inside the causal chain, so we can't step outside to see whether the chain was inevitable, or just one path among infinite possibilities. But consider the meta level. Adventure Time is a show, a creation with writers and animators and voice actors. Every event in Farmworld was planned by the creative team. From that perspective, everything is absolutely predetermined because it's fiction, because Finn was always going to reach for the crown, and Jake was always going to be possessed because that's what the script says happens. Does that make free will within the show's universe meaningless? Maybe not, because fiction operates on a weird ontological level, where characters can have meaningful agency, even though they're also following a script written by external creators. We can watch Farmworld Finn make his choice and feel the weight of that choice, feel that it matters, feel that he could have chosen differently within the logic of the story, even though we know as viewers that the animators were always going to draw him reaching for the crown. The free will versus determinism question works differently in fiction than in reality, but that doesn't make it uninteresting or irrelevant. Adventure Time uses alternate timelines to explore this question across multiple scenarios. Each timeline is a different roll of the cosmic dice, showing us how small changes produce large effects. In the main timeline, the bomb goes off and creates ooh. In Farmworld, the bomb doesn't go off and creates a dying wasteland. Same universe, different initial conditions, completely different outcomes. This suggests that determinism exists but operates from branch points, that reality isn't predetermined from some cosmic origin, but keeps generating new possibilities at crucial moments. But are those branch points real choices, or just random quantum fluctuations? Is there a meaningful difference between the multiverse branches based on choices and the multiverse branches randomly and we retroactively interpret branches as having been caused by choices? Both produce the same observable reality, infinite timelines with infinite variation, but the interpretation affects how we think about agency and responsibility. If Farmworld Finn makes a choice and that choice creates a timeline branch, then he has agency. His choice mattered. He's responsible for the outcome in his timeline. If the multiverse just randomly branched, and Farmworld happened to be the branch where the Finn in it reaches for the crown, then agency is an illusion, a story we tell about random events to make them feel meaningful. The show doesn't commit to either interpretation, leaving us with both possibilities floating in superposition. There's also the question of whether cosmic design has purpose. Does Prismo grant the Lich's wish because that's what's supposed to happen according to some grand plan? Or is Prismo just following mechanical rules without any deeper meaning? Is there a cosmic author writing the story of the multiverse with intent and themes and messages? Or is existence just math, physics equations running forward from initial conditions, meaning emerging as an accident of complex systems without any author behind it? Adventure Time tends to suggest that cosmic beings like Prismo are somewhere between mechanical rule followers and intentional agents. They have personalities, preferences, desires, but they're also constrained by cosmic laws they didn't create and can't violate. This middle ground is maybe the most realistic approach to the question, acknowledging that we all operate within constraints we didn't choose while still having some room for agency within those constraints. Think about your own life for a moment. You didn't choose your genetics, your birth time and place, your early environment, the economic and political systems you were born into. All of that was determined by factors beyond your control. But within those constraints, you make choices. You decide what to have for breakfast, what career to pursue, who to love, how to respond to challenges. Those choices are real even though they're made within a framework you didn't design. That's the human condition, and Farmworld just makes it more extreme by tightening the constraints until the choice becomes impossible. The philosophical horror of Farmworld is that it suggests constraints can be tightened so much that meaningful choice becomes impossible, that determinism can overwhelm agency completely if circumstances are bad enough. It's not that free will doesn't exist, it's that free will requires certain conditions to operate, and Farmworld lacks those conditions. You need options to choose between. You need information to make informed choices. You need time to deliberate. You need outcomes that differ meaningfully based on your choice. Strip away enough of these prerequisites, and what's left might technically be choice, but doesn't feel like choice in any meaningful sense. Can we escape our destinies? Farmworld suggests that destiny is just another word for the intersection of character and circumstance, personality traits meeting environmental pressures to produce predictable outcomes. You can't escape destiny because you can't escape being yourself in your circumstances. You could change circumstances, but then you'd have different circumstances producing different outcomes, which is just destiny wearing a different mask. You could change yourself, but the process of change is itself determined by who you are and what resources you have for change. So even transformation is destiny playing out. This is bleak, but maybe there's a crack in the deterministic wall. Maybe the fact that we can examine these questions, think about choice and destiny and responsibility. Now maybe that reflexive awareness itself creates space for something that transcends pure determinism. If you're aware that circumstances shape your choices, you can intentionally reshape circumstances, or at least work within them more skillfully. Awareness doesn't break the causal chain, but it might give you more leverage within it. Or maybe that's just another comforting story we tell ourselves, and awareness is itself determined by brain states we don't control, and the feeling of using awareness to change outcomes is just the sensation of determinism running forward while creating the illusion of agency. Who knows? The farther you go down this philosophical rabbit hole, the less clear anything becomes, which might be why most people don't spend much time thinking about it. Practical living requires assuming you have choices even if you can't prove it philosophically. Farmworld exists as a thought experiment in narrative form. It asks, what if circumstances were bad enough that even heroes couldn't hero? What if love led to corruption? What if every choice was wrong? And it answers by showing us exactly that scenario, letting us witness the tragedy of inevitability, the horror of watching people do their best and fail anyway, not because they're weak, but because the game was rigged from the start. That's not a fun answer. It's not uplifting or encouraging. It doesn't leave you feeling empowered to make good choices in your own life. But it's honest in a way a lot of narratives aren't, acknowledging that sometimes circumstances overwhelm character, that sometimes right action is impossible, that sometimes the universe just crushes you regardless of your choices and virtues and efforts. Adventure Time earns its reputation for surprising darkness by being willing to go here, to show us Farmworld and say, yeah, this is also part of existence, the timelines where nothing works out and everyone suffers, and the apocalypse wins. Most children's shows wouldn't touch this territory. Most adult shows would handle it with less philosophical sophistication. Adventure Time does both, wrapping genuine existential horror in cartoon aesthetic and serving it to audiences who came for silly magic dog adventures, but get challenging questions about free will and cosmic design instead. So here's the question the show leaves us with. If you knew your choice was predetermined, if you could somehow see the causal chain leading to your decision stretching back billions of years and forward to whatever consequences follow, would that knowledge change anything? Would you choose differently? Or would you choose the same thing, but with the bitter awareness that choosing was an illusion all along? Farmworld Finn doesn't have that awareness. He reaches for the crown thinking he's making a choice, thinking he can control the outcome, thinking his love for his family justifies the risk. And maybe that ignorance is mercy. Maybe not knowing that you're playing out a cosmic script is the only thing that makes existence bearable, that lets you try and hope and love without being paralyzed by the knowledge that it's all just atoms following physical laws in a universe that doesn't care about your intentions or suffering or desperate hopes for a better outcome. Or maybe awareness is liberation. Maybe knowing that choice might be illusory frees you from the weight of responsibility, lets you act without the paralysis of moral deliberation, because all outcomes are equally predetermined anyway. Or maybe it doesn't matter at all. Maybe the question of free will versus determinism is just philosophy games that don't affect how you should live, because you have to act as if you have choices regardless of the metaphysical truth, because paralysis and nihilism are themselves choices that produce outcomes, that feed back into the causal chain whether it's determined or free. Farmworld doesn't answer the question. Farmworld just shows us what destiny looks like when it stops being mystical fate and becomes concrete horror, when the predetermined outcome is corruption and death, when the cosmic design seems malicious or at least indifferent to suffering. And standing in the snow, reaching for the crown, Farmworld Finn embodies the moment where free will and determinism collapse into each other and become indistinguishable, where choice and inevitability are the same thing, where agency and fate merge into one terrible action that defines a timeline and dooms everyone in it. Was he always going to reach for the crown? Did he choose to reach for the crown? Is there even a difference between those two questions? Ask Prismo. He'll probably give you a non-answer wrapped in cosmic wordplay, because reality operates on rules too complex for mortal comprehension, and maybe that's the point. Maybe we're not meant to understand whether we're choosing or being chosen for, just meant to live with the uncertainty and do our best with incomplete information and hope that our best is enough, even though Farmworld demonstrates pretty conclusively that sometimes it isn't. Sometimes love dooms you. Sometimes duty corrupts you. Sometimes the hero's journey leads to horror. And sometimes the only choice is which nightmare you prefer, the nightmare where you acted and failed, or the nightmare where you didn't act and watched everything die anyway. Welcome to Farmworld, where philosophy becomes biology, where questions about free will get answered with freezing corruption, and where the cosmic design seems to have been drawn by someone who really, really hated the idea of happy endings. At least in deterministic universes, you can't be blamed for your failures. They were always going to happen. Small comfort when you're transforming into Icefin, but technically accurate. Which is the best kind of accurate when your world is ending and metaphysics is all you have left. Main timeline, Finn arrives in Farmworld through cosmic accident and desperate necessity, chasing the Lich across dimensions because that's what heroes do when primordial evil escapes containment. One moment he's in Prismo's time room watching reality fracture. The next he's standing in a grey wasteland that looks nothing like home. The sky is wrong, the air tastes wrong. Everything feels off in a way he can't quite articulate, like stepping into a photograph of a place you know, but discovering the photograph is lying, showing you surfaces without the depth underneath. He doesn't understand what he's seeing at first. This can't be... Where's the Candy Kingdom? Where are the familiar landmarks, the tree fort, the Ice Kingdom's ridiculous castle? Instead he gets ruins and frozen ground, and the sense of a world that gave up trying to be interesting. Finn has seen post-apocalyptic settings before, obviously since he lives in one, but Oo's apocalypse is colourful, magical, weird. This apocalypse is just grey and cold and empty, like someone drained all the life out of reality and replaced it with a wasteland simulator running on minimal settings. Then he meets himself. And everything gets exponentially more complicated. Picture the moment when main timeline Finn encounters Farmworld Finn. Two versions of the same person, shaped by completely different circumstances into very different men. Main Finn is 17, wearing his iconic blue shirt and shorts, carrying a sword, radiating that heroic energy that makes him instantly recognisable as the protagonist of his own story. Farmworld Finn is older, harder, wearing practical farmer's clothes, sporting that mechanical arm, looking like someone who's forgotten what adventure even means. Same face, same basic bone structure, but completely different energy emanating from them. The recognition is immediate and unsettling. Main Finn looks at Farmworld Finn and sees a ghost of what he could have been. A timeline where circumstances crushed the hero out of him and left just a man trying to survive. Farmworld Finn looks at main timeline Finn and sees something he can't quite name. Maybe a dream he had once about being someone more than a farmer. Maybe a reminder of potential he never got to fulfill. Neither of them fully understands the multiverse mechanics at play here, but both feel the wrongness of standing face to face with their alternate self. The conversation that follows must be surreal beyond measure. How do you introduce yourself to yourself? Main Finn tries to explain about alternate timelines and the Lich's wish and how the bomb going off created Ooh, but not going off created this frozen wasteland. Farmworld Finn probably thinks he's hallucinating at first, because magic is rare in his world, and dimensional travellers even rarer. But the evidence is right there. A younger version of himself who talks about fighting wizards and dating princesses, and living in a tree with a magical dog brother, all things that sound like fever dreams to someone whose biggest adventure is fighting off mutants. Main Finn's reaction to seeing his alternate life is complicated emotional terrain. On one level, there's relief. Thank Glob I didn't end up like this. Farming in a wasteland, mechanical arm clicking, family to worry about, no adventures, no glory, just survival. But on another level, there's something almost enviable about Farmworld Finn's life. He has a wife who loves him. Kids who depend on him. Purpose that comes from protecting specific people rather than abstract concepts like justice or good. Main Finn at 17 is still figuring out relationships, still dealing with the aftermath of failed romances with Princess Bubblegum and Flame Princess, still searching for his place in the world. Farmworld Finn found his place, even if that place is harsh and limiting. There's also horror in the recognition. Main Finn realises how much his life depends on circumstances he didn't control, the magical dog parents who raised him, the friends who support him, the land of Ooh providing infinite opportunities for heroism. Strip away those circumstances and he becomes Farmworld Finn, still fundamentally good but ground down by reality into something ordinary, something that never got to fulfill its heroic potential. It's a humbling realisation, confronting the fact that your identity isn't just internal character, but also external luck. that who you are depends enormously on where and when you are. Farmworld Finn's perspective is equally complex. He's looking at a version of himself who got to be the hero he maybe dreamed about being when he was younger, before Farmworld's reality taught him that heroes are luxuries this world can't afford. There might be envy there, or resentment, or just exhausted recognition that timelines aren't fair, that some Finns get to fight evil and save princesses while other Finns get to fight mutants and save crops. But there's also probably confusion, because main Finn's life sounds insane by Farmworld standards. You live in a tree, with a talking dog, and you fight wizards. What even is a candy kingdom? None of it makes sense from Farmworld's grounded perspective. The collaboration between them is born from desperate necessity. The Lich is in Farmworld. The bomb is going to detonate. Reality is fracturing. They don't have time for lengthy philosophical discussions about the nature of identity and the multiverse. They need to act, which means these two Finns, strangers who share a face and nothing else, have to find a way to work together against threats neither can handle alone. Watch how they operate together, and you see the differences crystallized in action. Main Finn is aggressive, optimistic, used to problems having solutions if you just hit them hard enough with swords or friendship. Farmworld Finn is cautious, pragmatic, calculating risk versus reward because in his world resources are limited and mistakes are fatal. Main Finn wants to charge in and save everyone. Farmworld Finn wants to evacuate his family and let the cosmic forces sort themselves out. These aren't compatible approaches, which creates friction and conflict even though both Finns are fundamentally trying to do good. There's a tragic irony in how their different approaches both fail. Main Finn's heroic optimism crashes against Farmworld's harsh reality. You can't friendship speech your way out of the Lich's corruption. You can't punch the bomb into not exploding. The tools that work in OO don't work here, which leaves Main Finn feeling helpless and frustrated in ways he's not used to experiencing. Meanwhile, Farmworld Finn's pragmatic caution proves equally useless because you can't escape cosmic threats through careful planning and risk management. The scale of what's happening exceeds his framework for dealing with problems, leaving him grasping for solutions that don't exist. Then Ice Finn emerges. Farmworld Finn puts on the crown, transforms into the frozen horror we discussed earlier, and main timeline Finn has to confront the reality that his alternate self chose corruption. Not because Farmworld Finn was evil or weak, but because circumstances pushed him to a place where corruption looked like the only option. Main Finn watches himself, or a version of himself, become everything he's fought against throughout his adventures in OO, and it's devastating on a level that simple enemy confrontation never achieves. Fighting Ice Finn isn't like fighting the Ice King. The Ice King is goofy and sad, a villain you can defeat without feeling too bad about it because he's not really trying to hurt anyone. He's just broken and confused. Ice Finn is immediate recent corruption, power without any of the quirky personality that makes Ice King bearable. It's Finn's face and voice, but cold and wrong and radiating malevolence that doesn't come from Finn's personality, but from the crown overwriting that personality with ancient evil. Main Finn has to fight himself, has to see his own features twisted by corruption, has to hear his own voice pronouncing destruction. This is the battle for identity made literal. Two Finns, one corrupted and one pure, fighting not just physically but symbolically over what it means to be Finn, what choices define them, which version represents the truth of their character. Main Finn represents potential fulfilled, heroism actualized, the Finn who got to become what Finn is supposed to be. Ice Finn represents potential corrupted, heroism transformed into horror, the Finn who tried his best and failed in the worst possible way. They're fighting over which narrative wins, which version of their shared identity gets to persist. The physical confrontation is brutal. Ice Finn has the crown's power, can freeze things with a gesture, create blizzards, launch shards of ice like weapons. Main Finn has his sword, his experience fighting magical threats, his determination not to let any version of himself serve evil. They're matched in ways that make the fight feel like internal conflict externalized, like watching someone battle their own dark potential given form. Every time Main Finn lands a hit, he's hitting himself. Every time Ice Finn attacks, it's self-harm in the most literal sense. What does each Finn learn from the other? Main Finn learns that heroism is contingent, that character doesn't guarantee good outcomes, that you can be fundamentally good and still make terrible choices if circumstances are bad enough. He learns humility, the recognition that his heroic life depends on luck and circumstance as much as virtue and courage. He learns to appreciate what he has, the magical land and weird friends and infinite second chances that Yu provides. He learns that being a hero isn't just internal character but external support, that heroes need worlds that support heroism or they become something else. Farmworld Finn, in his brief moments of consciousness before and during the corruption, learns that alternate possibilities exist, that somewhere in the multiverse there's a version of him who got to be more than a farmer, who got to matter in ways beyond protecting his immediate family. That knowledge is probably both comforting and agonizing. Comforting because it means the potential was there. The heroic spirit existed inside him, even if circumstances never let it emerge. Agonizing because it confirms what he maybe always suspected, that his life was smaller than it should have been, that he was meant for more but the universe said no. The emotional devastation when Farmworld starts to fall apart is overwhelming. Main Finn watches this entire timeline, this entire reality full of people trying to survive, begin to collapse. The bomb detonates, spreading mutation. The Lich-Jake hybrid spreads corruption. Ice Finn adds frozen death to the chaos. Everything Farmworld Finn tried to protect, everything he sacrificed for, everything that made his hard life worth living, gets destroyed in a cascade of apocalyptic events that nobody can stop. And Main Finn is powerless to prevent it. He's just a visitor here, a dimensional tourist who arrived too late to save anything, who can only watch as an entire timeline dies. He tries, of course, because trying is what Finn does. He fights Ice Finn, battles the Lich-Jake hybrid, attempts to find some way to save Farmworld's inhabitants. But the scale is too large, the force is too cosmic, the damage too fundamental. You can't friendship speech entropy. You can't punch your way through the collapse of an entire timeline's causal structure. The guilt is staggering. Main Finn feels responsible even though he isn't. His presence in Farmworld didn't cause these disasters. The Lich's wish and Prismo's magic and the fundamental instability of the timeline caused them. But Main Finn is there, watching it happen, unable to prevent it. And that helplessness transforms into guilt because guilt is easier to process than pure helplessness. If he's guilty, then he had agency, could have done something differently. If he's just helpless, then he has to confront the reality that some disasters can't be prevented, some timelines can't be saved, some versions of himself are doomed regardless of his efforts. The moment when Farmworld gets erased or frozen or whatever cosmic mechanism Prismo uses to quarantine this damaged timeline is quietly apocalyptic. Maybe the entire timeline gets frozen in time, preserved like a bug in amber, everyone trapped in their final moments eternally. Maybe it gets erased, winked out of existence, everyone who lived there simply ceasing to be as if they never existed at all. Maybe it gets sealed away, walled off from the rest of the multiverse, left to rot in dimensional isolation. The show doesn't give us clear answers about Farmworld's ultimate fate, which makes it more haunting because we're left imagining possibilities. Main Finn has to leave. He can't stay in Farmworld, can't fix it, can't even properly mourn it because he has his own timeline to return to, his own problems to face. So he goes back through whatever dimensional portal brought him here, carrying the trauma of watching himself fail, watching an entire timeline die, watching a version of his life become horror. That trauma stays with him. You don't witness your alternate self become corrupted evil and just move on unchanged. That experience rewrites something fundamental in how you understand yourself and your place in the multiverse. The parallel structure here is brilliant narrative engineering. Adventure Time uses Farmworld to comment on main timeline Finn's journey by showing us what that journey looks like when the supporting structure is removed. Main Finn is brave, determined, heroic. But take away Jake, take away Princess Bubblegum, take away the land of Yu's magical support systems, and bravery becomes desperation, determination becomes stubborn survival, heroism becomes making impossible choices in no-win scenarios. The show is saying that heroes need more than heroic character. They need heroic contexts, worlds that support and enable heroism rather than punishing it. This makes main timeline Finn's adventures retroactively more meaningful. Every time he saves a princess or defeats a villain or resolves a conflict through creative problem solving, he's not just being heroic, He's also being lucky, fortunate to live in a world where heroism is possible, where problems have solutions, where friendship and determination actually matter. Farmworld shows us the alternative, the world where those things don't matter, where trying your best gets you corrupted and everyone dies anyway. The meta-narrative explores some of Adventure Time's core themes through the Farmworld lens. The show is fundamentally about growing up, about facing increasingly complex moral situations, about learning that the world is weird and complicated and doesn't always make sense. Farmworld is that theme taken to its logical extreme, showing a world so complicated and hostile that growing up means learning, that sometimes there are no good choices, sometimes trying to do right leads to doing wrong, sometimes love and duty are the mechanisms of your destruction. It's also about identity, and how much of who we are is internal versus external. Are you the same person in all circumstances, or do circumstances shape you so fundamentally that you become different people in different contexts? Finn meeting Farmworld. Finn forces confrontation with that question. They're the same in some essential way, same soul, or same fundamental character, or same base personality. But they're also completely different because their lives diverged at crucial points, because the worlds they lived in required different adaptations, because identity is fluid enough that the same starting material can produce radically different outcomes. Adventure Time also explores existential themes throughout its run, questions about meaning and purpose and how you find significance in an absurd universe. Farmworld is the show's most nihilistic expression of these themes, presenting a world where meaning is hard to find, where purpose gets reduced to mere survival, where significance requires looking at very small scales because there's no grand narrative to give life larger meaning. Farmworld Finn finds meaning in protecting his family, which is beautiful but also limiting, a retreat to the smallest possible circle of concern because larger circles are unsustainable in such a hostile world. The confrontation between the two Finns becomes a meditation on paths not taken, on alternate lives we might have lived if circumstances had been different. Everyone has moments of wondering what if, imagining other versions of themselves doing different things, making different choices, ending up in different places. Finn gets to actually meet his what if, gets to see concretely what his life would have been like under different circumstances, and it's not pleasant. Sometimes imagining alternate lives is escapist fantasy. Sometimes it's horror, confronting the reality that you could have been someone worse off, someone more broken, someone who never got the opportunities to become who you are. There's also commentary here on the nature of sacrifice and heroism. Main Finn regularly puts himself at risk for others, regularly chooses the hard right over the easy wrong, regularly sacrifices his own comfort or safety or desires for the greater good. Farmworld. Finn makes the ultimate sacrifice, gives up his very self to protect his family, and that sacrifice damns him. The show is asking whether sacrifice is always noble, whether there are some prices too high to pay even for good causes, whether heroism requires knowing when not to sacrifice yourself because your corruption serves no one. Standing in the ruins of Farmworld, watching his alternate self frozen in corruption or erased from existence or sealed away in dimensional quarantine, Main Finn faces the reality that multiverse theory isn't just abstract philosophy. There are real versions of him out there, living real lives, making real choices, facing real consequences. Some of those versions get to be heroes, some become horrors. The dice roll differently in each timeline, and nobody gets to control which version they end up being. You just get to be your timeline's Finn and hope that's enough. The return to his own timeline must feel surreal. Coming back to Ooh after Farmworld is like waking from a nightmare into a weird but fundamentally good dream. The Candy Kingdom exists. Jake is there, magical and friendly, and not possessed by ancient evil. Princess Bubblegum is doing science. The Ice King is annoying but harmless. Everything that Farmworld lacked, Ooh has in abundance. Main Finn probably never looks at his home the same way again. What once seemed ordinary becomes precious. What once seemed weird becomes wonderful. He's seen the alternative, lived briefly in a world without magic and wonder and possibility. And it makes his own world's absurdest joy feel like the most valuable thing imaginable. But he also carries the weight of Farmworld with him. The knowledge that he failed to save those people, the memory of fighting his corrupted self, the trauma of watching an entire timeline collapse. Heroes in Adventure Time often carry trauma from their adventures, but this is different, more existential, more personal. Farmworld isn't just another adventure that went wrong. It's a mirror showing him his own potential for corruption, his own contingency, his own fragility when support structures are removed. That's the kind of knowledge that changes you permanently. The bittersweet final note of the Farmworld arc is acceptance without resolution. Main Finn accepts that he couldn't save Farmworld, that some disasters exceed his ability to prevent, that heroism has limits, but he doesn't resolve the questions Farmworld raised. He doesn't figure out how to prevent similar catastrophes. He doesn't gain power or wisdom sufficient to protect all timelines from all threats. He just goes back to his life, carrying new scars, trying to be the hero his own timeline needs while remembering that somewhere in the multiverse's infinite branching, other versions of him are suffering fates he can't prevent and wouldn't survive. That's the human condition made manifest through cartoon metaphysics. We all live with the knowledge that our lives could have been different, that circumstances shaped us in ways we didn't control, that some version of us in some alternate reality is living a completely different story. We can't save those alternate selves. We can't even meet them, lacking Finn's dimensional travel capabilities. We just live our lives, making our choices, hoping we end up more like Hero Finn than Horror Finn, knowing that the roll of the cosmic dice could have gone differently and still might in futures we can't predict. Adventure Time packages this existential weight in a story about a boy and his alternate self fighting in a frozen wasteland, one corrupted by a magic crown, the other desperately trying to prevent further disaster. It's absurd on the surface, deeply meaningful underneath, which is how the show operates at its best. The silly exterior gives you permission to engage with difficult ideas, the serious core gives those ideas weight and resonance. And the combination creates something that works as both entertainment and philosophy. So when main timeline Finn returns home, when he hugs Jake and appreciates the tree fort and looks at the Candy Kingdom with new eyes, he's not just glad to be home, he's grateful for the accident of cosmic circumstance that made his timeline the one with magic and wonder, instead of the one with frozen corruption and slow death. He's mourning the Finn who didn't get that lucky, who tried just as hard but failed more completely. He's carrying the weight of knowing that heroism is contingent, that character isn't destiny, that circumstances matter as much as choices, and somewhere in the dimensional structure of the multiverse, preserved or erased or sealed away, Farmworld continues not existing in whatever way collapsed timelines don't exist. A monument to the idea that some versions of reality are just cursed from the start, that some wishes create more suffering than they prevent, that some apocalypses can only be postponed, not prevented. Main Finn escaped. Farmworld Finn didn't. Same person, different luck, and that's all it takes to separate heroic destiny from corruption and oblivion. Makes you think about your own timeline, your own luck, your own Farmworlds that could have been but weren't. Makes you grateful if you're wise, makes you humble if you're honest, makes you wonder which roll of the cosmic dice you actually got, and whether you'd even know if you ended up in the bad timeline. But probably best not to think about that too hard. Probably best to just hug your friends, appreciate your weird magical land, and try to be a hero while circumstances still support heroism. Because Farmworld proved that support isn't guaranteed, isn't permanent, and can disappear faster than you can say, I wish the bomb never went off. At least Finn got out alive. At least his Jake is still Jake and not Lich Jake. At least his timeline still exists. That's more than Farmworld Finn can say. And the silence from alternate timelines is deafening. The thing about breaking a timeline is that you can't unbreak it. You can seal it, quarantine it, maybe freeze it in some cosmic stasis where nothing continues happening, but nothing fully stops either. But you can't make it unhappen. Farmworld existed. People lived there. Farmworld Finn loved his family, worked his farm. He made choices that mattered to him even if they didn't matter to the broader multiverse. Then cosmic forces intervened, the timeline collapsed, and now Farmworld sits somewhere in the dimensional structure like a scar on reality. A reminder that wishes have consequences and some consequences can't be undone. Prismo feels this most acutely. He granted the Lich's wish because he had to, bound by cosmic law, by the fundamental rules that govern wish magic and the structure of his existence. But watching that wish play out, watching an entire timeline spiral into corruption and collapse, knowing he set those events in motion even if he didn't intend the specific outcomes, that weighs on him. Prismo isn't just a magical vending machine dispensing wishes without regard for consequences. He's conscious, aware, capable of feeling regret even when he's bound by rules that prevent him from acting differently. Think about Prismo's situation for a moment. He exists in this time room outside normal space and time, watching infinite realities play out simultaneously, seeing every possible outcome of every possible choice across the multiverse. He knows before he grants the Lich's wish that it will create suffering. He can probably see the rough shape of what Farmworld becomes, the suffering its inhabitants will endure, the apocalyptic ending waiting for them. But he has to grant the wish anyway because cosmic law supersedes personal preference. Because the rules of reality don't bend for feelings, even cosmic feelings. That's its own kind of hell. Being aware of consequences you can't prevent, being forced to participate in creating suffering, knowing you're complicit in horrors even though you lack agency to choose differently. Prismo probably thinks about Farmworld often, about the people he indirectly doomed through wish magic, about whether the cosmic rules that bind him are just or whether they're just another form of arbitrary cruelty baked into the universe's structure. The cosmic order itself must register Farmworld's collapse as some kind of disturbance. Reality doesn't just sprout new timelines without consequences. Each branch adds complexity to the multiverse's structure, creates new interactions and possibilities and potential paradoxes. When a timeline collapses, when Farmworld stops functioning as a viable reality and has to be sealed away, that creates ripples through the dimensional fabric. Other cosmic beings probably feel it, some equivalent of reality shuddering as one of its branches dies. Death himself might have opinions about Farmworld. An entire timeline's worth of deaths happening in compressed time, mutations and corruption, and apocalyptic events creating casualties on a scale that even Death, who's seen everything, might find notable. Does Death visit Farmworld during its collapse? Does he guide those souls to whatever comes after? Or do timeline deaths work differently, souls getting sealed away with the timeline they inhabited? The show doesn't tell us, but these questions hang in the air, unanswered cosmic logistics of what happens when reality branches fail. For main timeline Finn, the trauma of Farmworld becomes a permanent fixture of his psychological landscape. He's experienced trauma before, obviously. His early abandonment, his failed relationships, various defeats and setbacks throughout his adventures. But Farmworld trauma is different because it's existential rather than personal. It's not about him specifically failing or being hurt. It's about witnessing the fundamental contingency of existence. Seeing that heroism depends on circumstance. Learning that trying your best is sometimes catastrophically insufficient. Finn probably has nightmares about Ice Finn. Dreams where he's fighting himself, where he watches his own face freeze and corrupt, where he becomes the thing he fights against. These aren't nightmares about external monsters. They're nightmares about internal potential, about the recognition that under different circumstances he could have been the villain. That's psychologically destabilizing in ways normal adventure trauma isn't. You can recover from fighting monsters. Recovering from fighting your own potential for corruption requires different psychological work. Watch Finn in later episodes, and you can sometimes see Farmworld's shadow. Moments where he's more cautious about using power, more aware of unintended consequences, more humble about his ability to fix everything through heroic action. The naive optimism that characterized young Finn gets tempered by Farmworld's lessons, not eliminated but modulated, seasoned with awareness that the universe is more complicated and cruel than simple heroic narratives suggest. There are explicit references to Farmworld in later Adventure Time episodes, though they're often subtle. The show occasionally revisits the concept of alternate timelines, bringing back Prismo and his time room, exploring other dimensional branches. Each time this happens, Farmworld exists as subtext, the example of how badly timeline manipulation can go wrong, the cautionary tale about wishes and cosmic intervention. The writers don't need to explicitly mention Farmworld for it to inform these later stories. The precedent is there, hanging over everything, reminding us that reality is fragile and interventions have costs. Prismo's later appearances carry Farmworld's weight. He's more careful about wish wording, more explicit about warning people of consequences, more clearly burdened by his role as cosmic wish granter, who can't refuse wishes but can see the suffering they'll cause. His friendship with Jake and Finn takes on additional depth, when you remember that Finn witnessed firsthand what Prismo's wish magic can do. What cosmic power creates when misused, or even just used according to its rules. There's unspoken understanding between them, trauma shared across dimensional boundaries. The show also explores responsibility more deeply after Farmworld. When characters face choices that could have large consequences, the narrative treats those moments with more weight, more awareness of butterfly effects and cascade failures. Farmworld taught Adventure Time's writers, and through them the audience, that actions ripple outward in ways you can't fully predict or control, that good intentions don't protect against bad outcomes, that responsibility for consequences extends beyond what you directly intend. Princess Bubblegum's authoritarian tendencies get examined through this lens. She makes decisions for the Candy Kingdom's good, manipulates situations to produce desired outcomes, controls variables to prevent chaos. Post-Farmworld, these actions read differently because we've seen what happens when control fails, when the managed timeline collapses despite or because of intervention. Bubblegum's conviction that she knows best becomes more troubling when you've witnessed a timeline where everyone thought they knew best but nobody could prevent apocalypse. Even Ice King's story gains additional resonance. He's Simon corrupted by the crown, personality overwritten by ancient magic, consciousness scattered across years of madness. Farmworld showed us that corruption happening faster, more completely, to a different Finn in different circumstances. Ice King becomes not just a tragic figure in his own right, but a symbol of what the crown does to anyone, in any timeline, without exception. His occasional moments of clarity, where Simon surfaces briefly before sinking back into Ice King's madness, hit harder when you remember Ice Finn had no moments of clarity at all, just instant total corruption. Marceline's relationship with Ice King also deepens when you understand the multiverse context. She knows Simon from before his corruption, remembers who he was, helps him occasionally even though he doesn't remember her most of the time. That loyalty, that refusal to give up on someone who's mostly gone, that determination to see the person underneath the corruption, all of it resonates more powerfully when you know that in another timeline Simon's corruption happened differently but just as completely, and nobody was there to remember or care or fight for whatever fragments remained. The audience's emotional response to Farmworld is notably intense for Adventure Time, a show that regularly balances comedy with darkness, but usually keeps things ultimately hopeful. Farmworld isn't hopeful. It's bleak, nihilistic, offering no redemption or silver lining or lesson that makes the suffering worthwhile. People die or get corrupted or lose everything, and the universe doesn't care, doesn't provide meaning or comfort, or even the satisfaction of a properly resolved narrative. It just ends badly because that's what happens sometimes in some timelines. This resonates with audiences because it's honest in ways most entertainment isn't. Most shows, especially ones aimed at younger audiences, maintain some baseline optimism. Good ultimately triumphs. Effort matters. Love and friendship overcome obstacles. Adventure Time says yeah, usually, in the main timeline where you're watching from, but not everywhere, not in all circumstances, not when the dice roll wrong and the wish goes sideways and the timeline collapses. Sometimes effort doesn't matter. Sometimes love leads to corruption. Sometimes friendship means watching your brother become evil. And there's no narrative magic to fix it, no deus ex machina to undo the suffering, just the brutal reality of a timeline that went wrong and stayed wrong. Fans return to Farmworld episodes repeatedly, not because they're fun to watch, but because they're meaningful. The arc represents Adventure Time at its most artistically courageous, willing to sacrifice audience comfort to explore difficult ideas, to show that the whimsical, magical setting contains genuine horror, that the cute art style can depict real tragedy without flinching. This courage is what elevates Adventure Time from good kids show to legitimate art. The willingness to trust the audience with darkness, to respect viewers enough to show them uncomfortable truths about existence and consequence. The lasting impact on how fans view the main timeline is significant. After Farmworld, Ooo feels more precious, more contingent, more lucky. It's not just a magical land where adventures happen. It's the timeline where things went relatively right, where the bomb's transformation created possibilities instead of just destruction, where heroes can actually hero because the world supports heroism. Farmworld is the reminder that Ooo could have been something worse, that the apocalypse could have created a wasteland instead of a wonderland. That existence in a magical cartoon land is a stroke of cosmic fortune that shouldn't be taken for granted. This appreciation extends to individual characters. Jake becomes more precious when you've seen what happens to timeline variants where he gets possessed by the Lich. Princess Bubblegum's kingdom becomes more impressive when you've seen a world without kingdoms, just scattered survivors. Even Ice King's goofy villainy becomes almost comforting, a reminder that in this timeline at least corruption can coexist with personality, that even cursed crowns don't completely erase the people underneath them, that there's room for both tragedy and comedy in the same character. The mathematical beauty of alternate timelines gets showcased through Farmworld's existence. Prismo operates according to rules, cosmic mathematics that govern how wishes interact with reality, how timelines branch and diverge. Farmworld is proof that these aren't arbitrary rules, but actual structural features of how the multiverse works. The Wish created a specific kind of timeline branch with specific properties, and those properties played out according to logical if horrifying consequences. There's elegance in that. Terrible elegance. The recognition that reality operates according to consistent principles even when those principles produce suffering. This mathematical elegance also means Farmworld's existence is permanent in some sense. You can seal a timeline, stop it from interacting with other timelines, but you can't make it unhappen because it happened, because the multiverse branched, and that branch exists in the cosmic structure whether accessible or not. Farmworld is eternal in the way mathematical truths are eternal, a solution to the equation of what if the bomb didn't go off, that exists regardless of whether anyone can visit or observe it. The show's message about responsibility and impossible choices crystallizes through Farmworld's narrative. Finn faces impossible choices and makes terrible decisions not because he's weak, but because impossible choices don't have good options, only less bad ones, and sometimes even the less bad option is catastrophic. This is a more sophisticated understanding of responsibility than simple moral tales about choosing right over wrong. Sometimes wrong and wronger are your only options. Sometimes trying to avoid one disaster just creates a different disaster. Sometimes responsibility means accepting that you'll fail and people will suffer, and there's nothing you could have done differently that would have produced better outcomes. The impossible choice framework applies beyond Farmworld to many Adventure Time storylines. Finn choosing whether to pursue various romantic relationships knowing any choice will hurt someone. Princess Bubblegum deciding whether to control or trust her citizens, knowing both options have serious downsides. Marceline choosing whether to help Ice King remember he's Simon knowing that remembering causes him pain. These choices aren't about identifying the right answer and executing it. They're about navigating situations where all answers are wrong in different ways and you have to choose your preferred failure mode. Farmworld as Adventure Time's darkest achievement is worth celebrating because darkness has value, because art that confronts horror and suffering serves important functions that pure escapism can't. Farmworld gives viewers permission to acknowledge that life includes genuine tragedy, that some problems don't have solutions, that the universe isn't fair or just, or even neutral, but sometimes actively hostile to our hopes and efforts. That's not a fun message, but it's a true one. And art that tells truth, even uncomfortable truth, is doing important work. The achievement is also technical, the craft of taking a cartoon about magical adventures and using that format to explore existential philosophy, cosmic horror, and the nature of identity across timelines. The writers could have kept Adventure Time light and silly throughout its run, which would have been fine, perfectly acceptable children's entertainment. Instead, they chose to push boundaries, to trust the audience, to use the medium to examine difficult ideas through metaphor and narrative structure. Farmworld exemplifies that ambition, using alternate timeline mechanics to ask questions about free will, responsibility, circumstance, and the fundamental contingency of existence. Compare Farmworld to other shows' attempts at dark alternate timeline episodes, and the sophistication becomes clear. Most shows use alternate timelines as what-if scenarios that get resolved cleanly, teaching lessons about appreciating your real life. Farmworld doesn't resolve cleanly. It collapses messily, leaves trauma, offers no easy lessons except maybe don't make wishes you can't fully understand the consequences of, which isn't exactly actionable advice since nobody can fully understand consequences of anything. The lack of clean resolution is what makes Farmworld powerful, the refusal to provide comfort or closure or meaning beyond what you create for yourself. The show also explores how trauma from impossible situations propagates through systems. Finn's Farmworld trauma affects how he relates to others, which affects their choices and behaviours, which ripples outward through Ooze social networks. The Lich's wish created Farmworld, but it also created main timeline Finn's trauma response to Farmworld, which influences the main timeline's future, even though Farmworld itself is sealed away. Causation doesn't respect dimensional boundaries. Consequences echo across the multiverse's structure in ways that can't be contained or controlled. Living with consequences becomes the final theme. Everyone in Adventure Time lives with consequences of choices made by themselves or others, consequences cascading through time and space to create the present they inhabit. Farmworld makes this explicit by showing us a present entirely shaped by one wish's consequences, a timeline where everyone lives downstream from the Lich's malicious choice and Prismo's bound compliance. The people of Farmworld didn't choose their circumstances, didn't vote on whether the bomb should go off, just inherited a world shaped by forces beyond their control and had to make the best of it. That's relatable in ways the show's more fantastical elements aren't. We all live with consequences we didn't choose. Economic systems, political structures, environmental conditions, all of it inherited from previous generations' choices, shaping our possibilities in ways we can't fully control. Farmworld is that reality made extreme, stripped of optimism, showing what it looks like when the inherited consequences are catastrophically bad and there's no magical solution to fix them. It's social commentary disguised as alternate timeline adventure, critique of unchosen circumstances wrapped in cartoon aesthetics. The question of whether Farmworld could have been saved never gets answered satisfactorily, because the answer is probably no, not by the time Main Finn arrives, not without cosmic intervention on a scale that would create different problems. The timeline's fundamental structure was compromised from the moment the Lich's wish created it. Not because the wish was evil, though it was, but because wishes that alter history create unstable timelines. Realities built on counterfactual foundations that don't have the structural integrity of naturally occurring timelines. Farmworld was always going to collapse. The wish just determined when and how. This suggests a darker cosmology than Adventure Time usually presents. The idea that some realities are doomed from inception, that cosmic intervention creates more problems than it solves, that the multiverse might be better off if powerful beings stopped trying to improve things because improvement at cosmic scales tends toward catastrophe. It's a conservative message in a weird way, suggesting that systems left alone are more stable than systems someone tried to optimize, even if the optimization came from good intentions. But Adventure Time doesn't commit fully to that interpretation either. Sometimes intervention works. Finn saves people regularly. Princess Bubblegum's scientific management prevents disasters. Magic used wisely improves lives. The show maintains tension between these successes and Farmworld's failure, refusing to settle on simple answers about whether intervention is good or bad, whether cosmic powers should be used or avoided, whether trying to improve things is noble or hubristic. Standing at the boundary between sealed Farmworld and ongoing EU, metaphorically speaking, you can feel the weight of what was lost and what was preserved. Lost. An entire timeline of people who deserved better, who tried hard, who loved and suffered and hoped and failed. Preserved. The main timeline's continued existence, its magic and wonder and possibility. The chance for its inhabitants to keep having adventures and making mistakes and hopefully learning from them. The trade-off feels unfair because it is unfair. Existence doesn't negotiate fair trades. It just produces outcomes, and some outcomes are tragic. And tragedy doesn't mean anything except that suffering happened and continues happening across the multiverse's infinite branches. Finn carries Farmworld with him permanently, a psychological scar that never fully heals, a reminder that he glimpsed the dark side of multiverse theory and survived when his alternate self didn't. That survivor's guilt is part of his character development, part of how he matures from naive hero to someone who understands that heroism has costs and limits, and sometimes fails despite best efforts. The guilt isn't about anything he actually did wrong, it's about being the lucky timeline's Finn, the version who got to keep being a hero while other versions suffered and died. Survivor's guilt for surviving circumstances you didn't choose and couldn't control. The silence from Farmworld after its sealing is the loudest absence in Adventure Time's narrative structure. Where Farmworld once existed as an active timeline with people making choices and lives continuing forward, now there's just silence, dimensional void, whatever non-existence looks like for collapsed realities. That silence is a constant reminder of what cosmic forces can do, how easily entire timelines can be created and destroyed, how little individual lives matter to the vast machinery of multiverse mechanics. But here's the final comfort, such as it is. Somewhere in the infinite branching of possibility, there might be a Farmworld that worked out. A timeline where the Lich's wish got interpreted differently, where Finn didn't find the crown, where Jake didn't get possessed, where circumstances aligned just right to allow survival, and maybe even thriving. That timeline isn't the one we saw, but infinite possibilities means infinite variations, means somewhere a Farmworld Finn is living peacefully with Roslinian and the kids, farming successfully, aging gracefully, never encountering cosmic horror. Probability says that timeline exists, hope believes in it, reality doesn't guarantee it. But the uncertainty itself is oddly comforting. The recognition that we can't know all outcomes, that some versions of suffering might be balanced by versions of contentment, that the multiverse is large enough to contain both horror and happiness in measures we can't calculate. Adventure Time doesn't force this comfort on us. Doesn't insist we feel better about Farmworld by imagining better versions that might exist. Just presents the tragedy, lets it sit, trusts us to process it however we need to. That's respect for the audience, recognition that people can handle darkness without needing immediate consolation, that sometimes the most meaningful art sits with suffering rather than rushing to resolve it. So Farmworld remains sealed or erased or frozen, a monument to impossible choices and cosmic consequences, a warning about wishes and timelines and the fundamental fragility of existence. Its story is told, its lessons absorbed by whoever watched and understood that Adventure Time was doing something more ambitious than usual cartoon adventures, that beneath the whimsy and colour was genuine philosophical inquiry into the nature of reality and suffering, and the random chance that separates one person's fate from another's. Main Finn returned home. Farmworld Finn didn't have a home to return to. Same soul, different luck, and that difference is everything and nothing simultaneously. Cosmic injustice made manifest through timeline mechanics nobody chose and few understand. Living with consequences means accepting that some timelines collapse, some versions of yourself suffer fates you avoided through pure chance, some disasters can't be prevented no matter how hard anyone tries. It means continuing forward despite knowing that, despite carrying the weight of impossible situations and impossible choices made by yourself and others, despite the grinding certainty that existence includes tragedy and unfairness as fundamental features, not bugs to be fixed. Finn lives with Farmworld's ghost. Prismo lives with the guilt of granting the wish. The cosmic order lives with the disturbance of a collapsed timeline in its structure. The audience lives with the knowledge that our favourite show went there, showed us horror, refused to sugarcoat or resolve it cleanly, and Farmworld, wherever it exists in dimensional space, sits silent and sealed, a timeline that lived and died and left echoes across the multiverse that will never fully fade, because consequences are eternal, because choices ripple outward forever, because sometimes the darkest alternate timeline is the one that teaches you to appreciate the timeline you actually got. Even if appreciation is cold comfort when you remember what others lost, even if gratitude feels guilty when measured against suffering you witnessed but couldn't prevent, even if loving your own timeline requires accepting that other timelines burn while you watch helpless to intervene, that's the aftermath. That's what echoes forever. Consequences you can't escape, can't fix, can only carry with you as you keep moving forward through your own timeline, hoping your choices won't create another Farmworld somewhere down the probability branches, knowing that hope doesn't guarantee anything but still being all you've got. Welcome to living after Farmworld. The apocalypse didn't happen to you, but you watched it happen to others, and that watching changed you permanently into someone who knows that sometimes everything goes wrong, and there's no hero big enough to stop it. At least you know. At least you carry the memory of what was lost. At least the silence from sealed timelines gets acknowledged instead of forgotten. Small consolation. True consolation. The only consolation reality offers when consequences echo across dimensional boundaries forever. Let's be clear about something. Adventure Time didn't need to do Farmworld. The show was already successful. already beloved, already pushing boundaries for children's animation without venturing into full existential horror territory. The writers could have played it safe, kept things whimsical, maintained the balance of silly and serious that made the show work without tipping too far into darkness. Nobody would have blamed them. Nobody expected a cartoon about a boy and his magical dog to deliver a multi-episode arc about timeline collapse, identity corruption, and the fundamental contingency of existence. But they did it anyway. And that choice, that artistic courage to go there even when they didn't have to, is what separates Adventure Time from almost everything else in its genre. Farmworld isn't just a good story arc, it's a statement about what animation can do, what stories we can tell children and adults simultaneously, how far a show can push while still technically being a kids' show. It's Adventure Time at its most ambitious, most uncompromising, most willing to sacrifice audience comfort for artistic truth. Think about the landscape of children's animation when Adventure Time aired. Most shows operated within comfortable boundaries. Conflicts got resolved. Heroes won through friendship and determination. Alternate timeline episodes showed characters what life would be like without their friends. Then everyone learned to appreciate what they had and things returned to normal. Safe, predictable, emotionally manageable. Adventure Time looked at those conventions and said, what if we didn't do that? What if we showed an alternate timeline that's just worse, that doesn't teach a comfortable lesson, that collapses into tragedy and stays collapsed? What if we trusted our audience to handle genuine darkness? That trust is radical. It's a form of respect that children's media rarely extends to its audience. Most shows assume kids need protection from difficult ideas. That darkness should be sweetened with obvious morality or quick resolution. Adventure Time assumes its audience can handle complexity, can process tragedy without immediate consolation, can sit with uncomfortable ideas about fate and choice and cosmic injustice. This assumption turns out to be correct, as evidenced by how audiences responded to Farmworld, how it became one of the most discussed and analysed arcs in the show's run. The artistic achievement here operates on multiple levels. First, there's the narrative construction, using multiverse mechanics to explore character and theme in ways that wouldn't be possible in a single timeline. Farmworld lets us see Finn without Jake, without Ooh, without any of the support structures that make him a hero. It's character study through subtraction, showing us what remains when you strip away circumstance and leave only core personality traits. The answer is both beautiful and tragic. Farmworld Finn is still fundamentally good, still protective, still determined, but those qualities aren't enough without the right world to support them. Second, there's the thematic sophistication. Farmworld explores free will versus determinism, the nature of identity across timelines, the relationship between love and corruption, the limits of heroism, the role of circumstance in shaping outcomes. These are genuinely complex philosophical questions that don't have easy answers, and the show doesn't pretend otherwise. It presents scenarios, shows consequences, lets viewers draw their own conclusions about what it all means. That's treating animation as a legitimate medium for philosophical inquiry, not just entertainment or moral instruction. Third, there's the emotional honesty. Farmworld doesn't pull punches. It shows corruption, shows suffering, shows a timeline collapsing and people dying without sugarcoating any of it. The show maintains its distinctive art style and occasional humour, but the underlying reality is bleak. This honesty is powerful because it validates audience members who've experienced their own versions of impossible situations, who've made desperate choices, who've watched things fall apart despite their best efforts. Farmworld says, yeah, sometimes that happens, sometimes everything goes wrong, and it's not your fault, but it still hurts. The courage to show such darkness in a cartoon aimed partially at children deserves recognition. The entertainment industry is risk-averse, especially in children's programming where the stakes of potentially upsetting young viewers are high. Adventure Time risked backlash, risked parents complaining that the show got too dark, risked losing part of its audience by refusing to stay comfortably whimsical. The risk paid off artistically, but it was still a genuine risk, a choice that prioritised artistic vision over safe commercial considerations. Farmworld elevates Adventure Time's overall narrative by providing contrast and context. The show spent hundreds of episodes building establishing its kingdoms and characters and magical systems. That construction work is impressive, but Farmworld makes it meaningful by showing us what could have been instead. Every light-hearted adventure in Ooh gains weight when you remember that in another timeline, there are no light-hearted adventures, just grinding survival until cosmic forces destroy everyone. The contrast makes Ooh's weirdness feel precious instead of taken for granted. It also changes how we understand the show's central relationship between Finn and Jake. Their brotherhood seems natural, obvious, the core of the show. But Farmworld reveals that this relationship is contingent, that in different circumstances these characters never form their bond, that Jake could be someone else entirely and Finn would become someone else in response. The main timeline's Finn and Jake are lucky to have found each other, lucky that circumstances aligned to create their friendship. That luck transforms their relationship from inevitable to miraculous, from simple premise to profound blessing. The mathematical beauty of alternate timelines gets showcased through Farmworld's structure. Prismo's time room operates according to rules, cosmic mathematics governing how wishes interact with reality. The Lich's wish creates a specific type of timeline branch with predictable properties based on the wish parameters. The bomb not going off leads logically to Farmworld's characteristics through cause and effect chains that follow consistent principles. There's elegance in how the narrative respects its own cosmological rules, how consequences flow naturally from premises without arbitrary plot developments. This mathematical approach to storytelling reflects Adventure Time's broader interest in systems and how they work. The show explores economies, political structures, magical frameworks, always asking how things connect and what principles govern their interactions. Farmworld is systems thinking applied to timeline mechanics, showing how one change propagates through history to produce a completely different present. It's science fiction in the truest sense, using speculative scenarios to explore how reality might work under different conditions. What Farmworld teaches about alternate realities and storytelling is that alternate timelines don't have to be escapist fantasies or cautionary morality plays. They can be genuine explorations of possibility space, showing us versions of reality that could have existed under different circumstances. The value isn't in learning to appreciate your life by seeing worse alternatives. The value is in understanding contingency, recognizing that outcomes depend on factors often beyond anyone's control, developing humility about the role luck plays in determining who gets good lives and who gets suffering. This is sophisticated storytelling that respects multiple interpretations. You can watch Farmworld as cosmic horror, as philosophical inquiry, as character study, as commentary on heroism and circumstance. All these readings are valid because the narrative is rich enough to support them simultaneously. That's the mark of great art, creating works that operate meaningfully on multiple levels, that reward different viewers in different ways based on what they bring to the experience. The lasting impact on how fans view the main timeline can't be overstated. After Farmworld, every adventure in Ooh carries the implicit knowledge that this timeline could have been different, could have been worse, that the magical land we love exists because cosmic dice rolled favourably. This doesn't diminish Ooh, it enriches it, adds depth and appreciation, transforms casual entertainment into something fans hold more carefully because they understand its fragility. The Tree Fort is just a house where Finn and Jake live, but it's also a miracle of circumstance, a place that couldn't exist if history had gone slightly differently. Princess Bubblegum's Candy Kingdom becomes more impressive when you've seen a world without kingdoms, just scattered survivors fighting over scraps. Her scientific achievements, her political leadership, her ability to create and maintain a functioning society of candy people, all of it gains meaning when contrasted with Farmworld's failure to build anything sustainable. The Candy Kingdom isn't just impressive on its own terms, it's impressive as an achievement that required specific historical conditions to be possible, conditions that Farmworld lacked. Even the Ice King's tragedy deepens through Farmworld context. In the main timeline, Simon's corruption by the Crown happens slowly enough that fragments of his personality persist as Ice King's quirks. He's broken but not completely erased, tragic but also comic, a villain who's really just confused and lonely. Farmworld shows us the alternative, instant, total corruption that leaves nothing of the original person except biological memory. Ice King's occasional moments of clarity, his ability to sometimes help or be helped, his weird relationship with Marceline where traces of Simon surface, All of this becomes more precious when you've seen how much worse crown corruption can be. The show's willingness to say not every timeline gets a happy ending is perhaps its most mature artistic choice. Happy endings are defaults in most storytelling, especially children's storytelling. Heroes win, villains lose, order is restored, everyone learns valuable lessons. This structure is comforting but also limiting because it implies that good outcomes are normal, that bad outcomes only happen when someone fails or makes wrong choices. Real life doesn't work that way. Sometimes circumstances overwhelm effort. Sometimes there are no right choices. Sometimes you do everything correctly and still lose because the universe doesn't guarantee fair outcomes. Farmworld validates the experiences of people who've lived through their own versions of impossible situations. Viewers who've made desperate choices, who've watched things collapse despite their best efforts, who've learned that trying hard doesn't guarantee success. They see their reality reflected in Farmworld's narrative. That reflection is valuable even though it's painful, because being seen is important, because having your experience acknowledged as legitimate rather than dismissed as personal failure matters. The comfort paradox is that Farmworld, despite being deeply uncomfortable, ultimately provides a strange kind of comfort through its honesty. It says, yeah, an existence includes tragedy and injustice, and timelines where everything goes wrong, and acknowledging that isn't weakness or pessimism but realism. You're not crazy for noticing that the universe isn't fair. You're not failing for struggling with circumstances beyond your control. Sometimes the world is just Farmworld, hostile and dying and offering only bad options, and surviving that isn't heroism you'll get celebrated for, but it's still meaningful in its own quiet way. This message resonates across demographics, from kids dealing with bullying or family dysfunction, to adults navigating impossible workplace situations or caring for dying relatives. The specific circumstances differ, but the underlying pattern is the same. Sometimes you're trapped in Farmworld, doing your best with insufficient resources while cosmic forces you can't control determine outcomes you can't prevent. Farmworld doesn't fix that reality, but it validates it, says your experience is real and your efforts matter even when they fail to change outcomes. The audience's need for dark alternate timelines is about more than enjoying horror or tragedy. It's about having space to process difficult truths that normal narratives avoid. Most stories we consume are aspirational, showing us heroes succeeding and villains failing and everything working out in the end. That's valuable. We need hope and inspiration. But we also need stories that acknowledge when things don't work out, when hope isn't enough, when the ending is just loss without redemption. Farmworld provides that space, lets us sit with darkness in a safe container where we can examine it without being consumed by it. Adventure Time's contribution to animation is making this kind of sophisticated storytelling accessible to wide audiences. Before Adventure Time, shows that explored existential themes were typically aimed at adults, assuming children couldn't or shouldn't engage with complex ideas. Adventure Time proved that assumption wrong, showed that you can discuss philosophy and cosmic horror in ways that work for both kids and adults without talking down to either audience. The show trusted that children are smarter and more resilient than adults often give them credit for, capable of processing difficult ideas if presented with sufficient care and craft. The legacy of Farmworld extends beyond Adventure Time itself. Other shows saw what Adventure Time did and felt empowered to push their own boundaries, to trust their audiences with darker material, to explore genuine complexity rather than staying safely simple. The current landscape of animation includes more shows willing to go dark, to address real trauma, to acknowledge that not everything gets resolved neatly. That shift toward maturity and honesty in children's programming owes something to Adventure Time's example, to Farmworld specifically as proof that audiences can handle and appreciate sophisticated storytelling in cartoon form. Consider what Farmworld teaches about wishes and regrets. The Lich wishes the bomb never went off, and that wish creates more suffering than the bomb's detonation ever did. The moral isn't don't make wishes, it's understand that wishes have consequences you can't fully predict, that changing one thing changes everything connected to it, that the universe operates as an interconnected system where isolated interventions don't exist. This is wisdom about how reality works, packaged in a story about alternate timelines and cosmic wish magic, but applicable to any situation where you're tempted to think if only one thing were different, everything would be better. The roads not taken haunt everyone. Choices made and not made, opportunities seized and missed, relationships pursued and abandoned, all the forks in life's path where you picked one direction and left others unexplored. We can't know what those other paths would have led to, can't visit our own farm worlds to see how life would have been different. But we can imagine, can wonder, can sometimes regret or sometimes feel grateful for the particular sequence of choices that led to where we are. Farmworld literalizes that wondering, shows us concretely what happened down one particular road not taken, and the answer is horror. That's not comforting, but it's honest, acknowledging that alternate paths might be worse, that the life you have might be better than realistic alternatives even if it's not perfect. The recognition that some timelines are cursed from inception, that certain initial conditions produce inevitably bad outcomes regardless of individual efforts, is both depressing and liberating. Depressing because it suggests limits to agency, acknowledges that sometimes you're doomed by circumstances you didn't create and can't control. Liberating because it removes false hope, lets you accept that some situations genuinely are impossible, that your failure to fix them isn't personal inadequacy, but structural reality. Farmworld Finn couldn't save Farmworld not because he was weak, or made wrong choices, but because Farmworld was broken at the foundational level, cursed by the Lich's wish from the moment it branched from the main timeline. Standing at the end of this analysis, looking back across all the sections we've explored, the themes and characters and philosophical questions Farmworld raises, the artistic achievement becomes even clearer. Adventure Time took a simple premise about a boy and his dog having adventures and used it to explore some of the deepest questions humans ask. Do we have free will? Does character determine fate, or do circumstances? Is love always good, or can it lead to corruption? What do we owe each other across impossible distances? How do we live with consequences we can't change? These questions don't have answers, not clean ones anyway, and the show doesn't pretend otherwise. Farmworld is Adventure Time saying we can handle uncertainty together. We can sit with difficult questions and find meaning in the sitting even without resolution. We can appreciate the timeline we got while mourning the ones that didn't work out. It's philosophy disguised as adventure, trauma processing wrapped in cartoon aesthetics, genuine art that trusts its audience enough to be honest about how brutal existence can be. The final question Farmworld leaves us with is both personal and cosmic. What would your wish be? If you could make one wish that rewrote history, that changed some fundamental fact about how your life or the world developed, what would you wish for? And more importantly, would you risk it? Would you risk creating your own farmworld, your own timeline where the wish creates worse suffering than it prevents? Can you live with the consequences of intervention when those consequences are unpredictable and potentially catastrophic? There's no right answer. That's the point. Farmworld doesn't offer wisdom about what to wish for or whether to wish at all. It just shows what happened once when someone made a wish that seemed reasonable on the surface but produced horror in practice. The lesson, if there is one, is simply be careful what you wish for, not because wishes are evil, but because reality is complex and interconnected and changing. One thing changes everything in ways you can't foresee. So here's my question to you. Knowing what you know now about Farmworld, about how wishes can go wrong and timelines can collapse, and good intentions can create suffering, would you still make a wish if you had the chance? What would you wish for? The bomb to never go off, like the Lich. Something more personal, like Farmworld Finn wanting to protect his family. Or would you refuse to wish, accepting your timeline as it is because at least you understand its flaws rather than risking unknown horrors in an altered reality? Think about it. Sit with the question. Because in a multiverse of infinite possibilities, somewhere a version of you is living in your farm world, suffering through the timeline where your wish went wrong. And somewhere else, a different version is living in paradise because their wish went right. And you, reading this now, are living in the timeline you got, which is neither the worst nor the best, but simply yours, the only one you have access to, the only one where your choices matter because you're making them. That's the real adventure. Living in your timeline, making your choices, hoping they produce more ooh than Farmworld, knowing you'll never have certainty about outcomes but trying anyway, because trying is what makes existence meaningful, even when meaning is a story we tell ourselves rather than an objective feature of reality. Welcome to your timeline. It could be worse. It could be Farmworld. And somewhere in the infinite multiverse, a version of you is grateful you got the timeline you did, even with all its flaws and failures and disappointments, because at least it's not the frozen wasteland where love led to corruption and hope became cruelty, and the apocalypse waited patiently to claim everyone despite their desperate efforts to escape it. So maybe don't make wishes that rewrite history. Maybe just appreciate the history you got, acknowledge its contingency, be grateful for the cosmic dice roll that gave you this particular version of existence instead of worse alternatives, or ignore all that and make your wish anyway. Who knows? Maybe you'll create Ooh instead of Farmworld. Maybe your timeline branch will produce magic and wonder instead of horror and collapse, but probably not. Probably you'll create suffering you didn't intend while trying to prevent suffering you couldn't accept. Probably your wish will be one more demonstration that cosmic intervention produces unintended consequences, that changing the past dooms the future, that some timelines are cursed from the moment they branch. Probably best to just live in the timeline you have, make choices within it, hope they matter, even knowing they might not. Accept that existence includes tragedy, without letting tragedy define existence. That's what Farmworld teaches, finally. Not through explicit morals or clean resolutions, but through honest portrayal of what happens when wishes go wrong, and timelines collapse, and heroes fail despite trying their best. It's dark, it's honest, it's adventure time at its most mature and most meaningful. And somewhere in the cosmic structure of reality, sealed away in dimensional quarantine, Farmworld sits silent as a reminder that some stories don't end well, some timelines don't get saved, and sometimes the best you can do is survive long enough to witness the apocalypse rather than dying before it arrives. At least that way you know how it ends. Small comfort, but comfort nonetheless when comfort is rare and timelines are collapsing, and the multiverse doesn't promise anything except infinite variation, with no guarantees about which variation you get. So what's your wish? And more importantly, can you live with what it creates?